Hey everyone. Welcome back to Eclipse Wizardry. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Tonks accidentally kissed Harry at age 8 and her Metamorphmagus magic locked onto him as her only king? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1. The North Star. The park on Magnolia Crescent smelled like cut grass and exhaust fumes and the particular kind of boredom that settled over suburban England in late July like a wool blanket no one asked for. Harry Potter sat on the roundabout, not spinning it, just sitting. His trainers were Dudley's old ones, 3 sizes too big, held on by a double knot and stubbornness. He had a stick he'd found near the fence, and he was using it to draw patterns in the gravel beneath his feet, not patterns he'd seen anywhere, just patterns that felt right. Spirals inside hexagons. Lines that branched like lightning. He didn't know they were runes. He was 8. It was the kind of Tuesday that had nothing in it. Dudley and his friends had gone to the cinema for Piers Pocus's birthday, and for once Aunt Petunia had simply forgotten to invent a chore to keep Harry sufficiently occupied and miserable. So he'd slipped out the back gate, walked 4 streets over to the park where Dudley and his gang never went because there was no ice cream van, and sat down on the roundabout with his stick and his spirals and a very unusual amount of peace. He was so used to being alert, listening for footsteps, for the particular floorboard outside his cupboard that creaked when someone was coming, that the quiet felt strange. Like the pause before something happened. Which was, as it turned out, accurate. The girl came over the fence. Not through the gate. Over the fence, the chain-link one at the north end of the park, the one with the gap at the bottom where local dogs squeezed through. She came over the top of it with the chaotic confidence of someone who had not yet learned that falling hurt, landed wrong on the other side, and then the entire sequence of her forward momentum carried her, sprinting, arms wheeling, directly into the roundabout. Which Harry was sitting on. The impact was brief, spectacular, and anatomically impressive. The girl's face connected with Harry's shoulder, bounced, and then, in the very specific geometry of 2 bodies falling in opposite directions and somehow finding each other again, her mouth pressed against his cheek for approximately 1 second before they both crashed sideways into the gravel. Harry lay on his back staring at the sky and inventorying himself for damage. Grazed palm. Something ringing faintly in his left ear. Gravel in his hair. He was, overall, fine. Then the magic happened. He felt it the way he sometimes felt things he couldn't explain, not in his hands or his chest but somewhere deeper, somewhere that didn't have a name. Like a key turning in a lock that he hadn't known existed. A single, resonant click that moved through him from the point on his cheek where her mouth had been, down through his spine, and out through his soles into the gravel beneath him. The roundabout shuddered. The gravel scattered in a perfect circle outward, like a stone dropped in still water. Then it was gone. Just a park again. Just Tuesday. The girl sat up. She had short hair that couldn't quite decide what color it was. It had been brown when she came over the fence, Harry was almost sure, but now there were streaks of something bright running through it, gold or copper, flickering at the edges like a flame that hadn't committed to burning yet. Her eyes were wide and dark and she had a scrape on her chin and she was staring at him with an expression that mixed alarm, confusion, and something that looked almost like recognition. "Did you feel that?" she said. "You knocked me off a roundabout," Harry said. "Not that." She pressed a hand to her sternum. "The other thing." Harry considered lying. It was his default, had been for years. "Nothing happened, I didn't do anything. It wasn't me." But she was looking at him with such direct certainty that the lie died before it reached his mouth. "The click," he said instead. Her breath came out in a rush. "Yes. Exactly that." She looked down at her own hands, turned them over, and Harry watched in absolute silence as her fingernails shifted color, from bitten-down plain to deep blue to a frantic, cycling shimmer. She yanked her hands back under her arms, face going pink. "Don't," Harry started. I know, I wasn't supposed to do that in front of," she stopped. Looked at him properly. "You're a muggle." I don't know what that is, Harry said. But I don't think so. She stared at him for a long moment. Then she stuck out her right hand, still sitting in the gravel, and said, I'm Tonks. Don't call me Nymphadora, I'll hex you. Harry shook her hand. Harry. Harry Potter. The color cycling in her fingernails stopped. Everything stopped, the distant traffic, the pigeons on the fence, the small suburban universe of Magnolia Crescent with its neat hedges and its ordinary sky. Tonks went absolutely still, and something moved through her face that Harry couldn't read, recognition, and wait, and something almost like grief, though she was 7 years old and had no particular reason for grief and wouldn't have been able to name it herself. Harry Potter, she said quietly. You've heard of me? His voice came out smaller than he meant it to. My mum has. She talks about you sometimes. She paused. She cries, after. Harry didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He was good at saying nothing. He'd had a lot of practice. Tonks looked down at her hands again. And then, right in front of him, with the careful concentration of someone attempting something they'd done 1,000 times and still couldn't get right, her hair changed. All of it, root to tip, from the flicker brown gold to a vivid, shocking pink that had absolutely nothing to do with any natural hair color ever worn by any human being. She held it for 3 seconds. Then her face crumpled slightly with effort and it faded back. I can usually only do about 2 seconds, she said. That's the most I've ever managed. A pause. It was longer just now. Because of the, maybe. She chewed her lip. My magic does things. I'm a Metamorphmagus. That means I can change how I look, but I'm rubbish at it. My mum says I'll get better when I'm older, but I'm not getting better, I'm just, she made a gesture with both hands that managed to convey general catastrophe without specifics. Getting worse and more embarrassing. The other day I accidentally turned myself into a version of my dad while I was at school and my teacher thought I'd been replaced by a very small man. Harry, who had not laughed in quite some time, laughed. It came out surprised, like it had ambushed him. Tonks grinned. It transformed her whole face. Last week I sneezed and my nose stayed as a pig nose for 20 minutes. What does your mum do about it? She's a witch. She fixes it. Something shifted in her expression, more careful now. She'd want to know I talked to you. She'd want to know about the thing that happened. She glanced at the scattered gravel, the circle still faintly visible. That's not normal. That's not how my magic works. It's never done anything when I mean, I've kissed my dad on the cheek before and the magic doesn't. You kissed me on the cheek, Harry said, without heat, just noting it. Tonks went the same color as her hair had been, which was impressive. I crashed into you. It was an accident. I wasn't, I don't, she took a breath. I'm 7. I know. I'm 8. I'm not, I didn't mind. Harry paused, choosing words with the careful economy of someone who'd learned not to waste them. It was an accident. But something happened. Yes, Tonks said. Something happened. They sat in the gravel for a while. Around them the park continued its Tuesday business. A dog appeared through the fence gap, investigated them briefly, and left. Somewhere close, a lawnmower started up. Do you live near here? Tonks asked. 4 Privet Drive. It's the next street. I'm visiting my Aunt Hestia. She lives on Wisteria Walk. She paused. That's quite close. Yes, Harry agreed. I could come back tomorrow. If I wanted to. She said it with exaggerated casualness, the kind that is entirely transparent in children and some adults. Not because of the magic thing. Just. You seem all right. Harry thought about Dudley coming home from the cinema. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs, and the way morning felt inside it, cramped and gray and lasting forever. He thought about the spiral runes he'd been drawing in the gravel, the ones that felt right in a way he couldn't explain, and how this girl had crashed into his afternoon and made something click in his chest and laughed at her own pig nose without embarrassment and looked at him like he was a person rather than a problem. "You could come back," he said. "If you wanted." Tonks came back the next morning, and the one after that, and by the end of the week they had established a routine with the easy totality that children achieve and adults envy. Harry slipped out early, before his aunt was properly awake, and Tonks appeared over the fence at approximately 9 o'clock with whatever she'd stolen from her aunt's kitchen and a new magical disaster to report. The magical disasters were, Harry quickly understood, no longer quite so disastrous. "Watch," she said on the third morning, sitting cross-legged across from him on the park bench. She closed her eyes, and her hair shifted, pink, then blue, then a deep arterial red, then back to pink and staying there, holding it, no visible effort, just a slow smile spreading across her face like sunrise. 20 seconds, she said, opening her eyes. I counted. That's 4 times better than Monday. I know. She looked at her hands. I changed my eye color this morning, too. Just for a second, but I changed it. My mum nearly choked on her tea. She paused. She asked how. I didn't tell her about you. Why not? Tonks picked at the edge of the bench. Because she'd do something about it. Adult something. She'd come here and look at you and make a fuss, and she'd want to move me away from you because that's what adults do when something magical they don't understand happens. They separate the magical things and study them. She looked at him directly. I don't want to be separated from you. You make my magic work properly. I'm not letting anyone take that. Harry absorbed this. The directness of it, the lack of apology. He wasn't used to people being direct with him. At the Dursleys everything was implication and consequence, a language of sighs and silences. Tonks just said the thing. Okay, he said. Okay? She blinked. You don't tell your mum yet. I won't tell my aunt, not that she'd care, and you don't tell yours. He paused. But eventually someone's going to notice. Eventually, Tonks agreed, with the complete serenity of a 7-year-old who considers, eventually, to be a problem for a much older person. What neither of them knew, sitting on that park bench while the morning came in warm over the rooftops, was that the magic had already begun the work of noticing for itself. Harry felt it starting the next day, subtle, the way the beginning of things always is. He woke up in his cupboard and felt something like a compass settling. A direction. North wasn't north anymore. North was a pink-haired girl 4 streets away, and his magic knew the precise distance and angle. He lay in the dark and breathed and felt it, not intrusive, not demanding, just present. Like someone had left a light on in a room he'd always thought was empty. He didn't mention it to Tonks. She had her own version to deal with. She told him about it on the 5th day, arriving at the fence gap with her hair a startled orange and her expression somewhat shell-shocked. I knew you were here before I came over the fence, she said. I was halfway down Wisteria Walk and I just knew. Which direction? How far? She sat down heavily beside him. My magic is pointing at you. Mine's doing the same thing. She turned to look at him. This is very weird. Yes. I mean magically unprecedented and quite possibly alarming. Probably. We should definitely tell someone eventually. Eventually, Harry agreed. Tonks looked at him for a long moment, and then some of the tension went out of her shoulders and she almost smiled. You're very calm about everything. Harry thought about all the things that had happened to him that he'd been calm about. The cupboard. The not enough food. The way Dudley's fists felt. The strange things his magic had done, shrinking jumpers back to his size, regrowing his hair overnight, ending up on a school roof with no memory of climbing. He'd been calm about all of those because calm was the only available option when there was no one who would believe him if he wasn't calm. I've had practice, he said. Tonks looked at him with those dark eyes that saw more than they should for a 7-year-old, and she didn't push it, but Harry felt her magic pulse once, warm and certain, like a hand laid briefly over his. August arrived, and with it the end of Tonks's visit to her aunt. She appeared at the park on the first morning of the month with her hair a determined bubblegum pink and a piece of parchment in her hand. "Our address," she said, and held it out. "Write to me. We have an owl." She paused. "Well, Mum has an owl. She doesn't know I've borrowed her address." Harry took the parchment. He had no owl, no parchment, no quills. He had no way to receive a letter in a house where the post was monitored, and any owl arrival would cause Aunt Petunia to have a very specific kind of conniption. Tonks read this on his face. She reached into the pocket of her jeans and produced a small coin, bronze, worn smooth, with markings on it that Harry didn't recognize. "Tap it with your finger and think of me. I have the other one. I'll feel it, I think. The magic it should work, I think. It's a protean charm. My cousin Charlie explained it to me once, but I might have the theory slightly wrong." Harry turned the coin over in his hand. "Might have it slightly wrong," he repeated. "Probably fine," Tonks said, with magnificent confidence. Harry closed his fingers around the coin. And yes, faint and warm through the bronze, he could feel her. That same directional certainty, compressed into a small disk of metal. His thumb ran over the markings. "I'll come back," Tonks said. She was using her "I'm not emotional" voice, which was undermined by her hair cycling through 4 colors in quick succession. "Next summer. Or before. Mum comes to London sometimes. And," she stopped. "I know where you are now. Here." She tapped her own sternum. "So do you." "Yes," Harry said. She gave him a look that was complicated and fierce and 7 years old, and also, somewhere underneath, much older. Then she went back over the fence, not quite as chaotic going out as she'd been coming in, and Harry stood in the park with the coin warm in his palm and watched the empty fence for a long time after she was gone. The compass in his chest pointed after her, precise and patient. He went home. The cupboard under the stairs at number 4 Privet Drive was 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and had a broken spider in the upper left corner that Harry had decided was not a real spider but the shadow of a spider, which was fine. He knew every inch of it. He knew the particular cold that came through the wall at night in November, and the way sound moved differently in it during thunderstorms. He had lived in it for as long as he could remember. What was different, now, was that he had the coin. It sat under the loose floorboard beside his cot-style mattress, and Harry's hand found it in the dark the way other children's hands found stuffed animals. The warmth didn't fade. If anything, as weeks passed and August became September and the long gray corridor of the school year opened up ahead of him, the warmth became more constant, more reliable. Tonks was out there, somewhere to the northwest, getting on with being 7 and a Metamorphmagus, and the fact of her existence pressed warm and solid against Harry's chest like a standing promise. Strange things still happened around Harry, they'd always happened, since before he could name them or understand them. But they were different now. More deliberate. When Dudley cornered him in the back garden and the hose turned itself on, it turned itself on specifically, directed, catching Dudley square in the face with more accuracy than a bored garden hose had any right to. When Mrs. Figg's cat knocked over her bookshelf onto Harry's legs, the books stopped 2 inches from his shins, stacked themselves briefly in midair, and set themselves down beside him. Harry looked at the stacked books and felt his magic settle back, satisfied, like a cat that had made its point. He was getting better at it too, then. Whatever had clicked in the park, whatever Tonks's magic had unlocked or named or found, it was reshaping things at a level below conscious thought. His magic didn't feel like a startling intrusion anymore. It felt like a language he was slowly learning to speak. Dudley noticed. Dudley always noticed changes in Harry because changes in Harry were potential threats to Dudley's dominance, which was the primary organizing principle of Dudley Dursley's interior life. He started avoiding the direct approach, no more cornering Harry alone. He went instead for the long campaign, whispers to his friends, poisoned words in the right ears at school, the particular art of the social exclusion that leaves no bruises. Harry didn't care. He found he didn't care about quite a lot of things he had previously endured as constants. The whispers didn't reach him. The exclusion didn't cold-bone him the way it once had. He had a compass in his chest pointing to someone who had crashed into his afternoon and laughed at her own pig nose and said, "I'm not letting anyone take that about him," specifically, and the whole architecture of Dudley's small cruelty seemed, in comparison, extremely unimportant. Uncle Vernon noticed too, and what he noticed made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't articulate and therefore expressed as a general increase in thunderous displeasure around Harry. The boy was too quiet. Too still. He didn't flinch the right way anymore. Vernon Dursley had a very specific read on what Harry was supposed to be: apologetic, absent, grateful for grudging tolerance, and something had shifted it, and he didn't know what, and things Vernon Dursley didn't understand generally received the treatment of loud, sustained dismissal. "What are you smiling about?" he demanded one Sunday breakfast, across the table that Harry was setting with the mechanically perfect compliance he'd developed as armor. "Nothing, Uncle Vernon," Harry said, and it was technically true, he wasn't smiling, or at least not externally. But there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, some settled quality, and Vernon's own eyes narrowed on it. "You're to go straight home after school tomorrow," Vernon said, as though this were related to the smile question, as though it were punishment for something. "No dawdling." "Yes, Uncle Vernon," Harry said, and finished setting the table, and felt the coin warm against his thigh in his pocket where he always kept it, and did not think about the cupboard or the school or the long grey corridor of winter at all. He thought about a pink-haired girl going over a fence and the click of a key in a lock and the way his magic felt now, not like a hiccup or an embarrassment but like a second heartbeat, steady and purposeful and entirely his. The letter came in October. Not the Hogwarts letter, that wouldn't come for years yet. This was a square of cream-colored parchment, rolled tight and sealed with a wax stamp of a waning crescent moon, delivered not by owl but found tucked inside the pages of Harry's school copy of Fantastic Mr. Fox, which he hadn't opened that day and which had definitely not had a letter in it when he'd put it in his school bag that morning. He read it in the boys' lavatory at Stonewall Primary School, 1 foot against the door because the locks were broken. "Harry, you were right. Someone noticed. Mum found out. Not all of it, she doesn't know about the anchor thing, that's what I'm calling it now, the anchor thing, but she knows something happened when I was in London because my magic changed and she's a smart witch and she sat me down and looked at me and asked. I told her I'd met someone. I didn't say who. She knows I'm not telling her who and she's going to find out eventually because she has that mum face where she's decided something and she's just waiting." It felt different writing this than sending an owl. Did it feel different to you? It felt like talking. I can still feel you. You're south-southeast of me and you're at school and you're slightly annoyed about something. Are you all right? TPS. My hair has been pink for 6 weeks straight now and I did it on purpose. 6 weeks. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket next to the coin and walked back to class, and when his teacher asked him what he was grinning about he said nothing and meant it entirely differently than he had at Uncle Vernon's breakfast table. That evening, in the cupboard, he wrote back by the thin line of light under the door, 6 weeks is impressive. I knew the letter was there before I opened the book. I could feel it. The anchor thing is a good name. It works both ways. You're northwest of me from where I am now. When you move, the direction moves. Mum face sounds dangerous. My aunt has a similar face but about different things. I'm all right. More all right than I was. HPS. What happens when you change shape now? You said your magic was getting better. How much better? He pressed the parchment between the pages of his own book, his own copy of Fantastic Mr. Fox, bought second-hand with money he'd found in the school playground, and set it on the floor. In the morning it was gone. In its place was a single copper-colored hair. He kept that too. The year turned. The coin got warmer in winter, as if compensating for the cold of the cupboard, which Harry knew was not how coins worked but accepted as fact. The letters came and went, tucked in unexpected places, between cereal boxes and under loose stones in the garden, and once, memorably, folded into the shape of a bird and perched on the end of his cot. He didn't know how she did that one. He asked. She said she'd got the idea from a library book and it had taken 11 attempts and the first 6 had exploded. He learned things about her in pieces. She was being home tutored now, not school, because her magic was too unpredictable for a classroom even with the suppression techniques her mother was teaching her. She had a father called Ted who was Muggle-born and laughed loudly and worked with enchanted objects and had once accidentally turned himself orange for a fortnight. She had a cousin called Sirius who was in prison, though she didn't explain why, and the way she wrote about it, briefly, just a mention, with the closed quality of a door that leads somewhere too large to enter casually, told Harry it was important and raw and he didn't push. She was learning to change her bone structure now, not just surface features. She'd managed her nose and one cheekbone and she described the feeling as, like rearranging furniture inside your face, which is exactly as odd as it sounds. He learned, too, that she'd found out who he was, properly found out, not just the name. She'd found one of her mother's books, A Magical History, and read the chapter about the Potters and the night at Godric's Hollow and the boy who survived. She didn't make it a big thing. She wrote, "I read about your parents. I'm sorry. My mum cried when when it happened. A lot of people cried. And then, I think your mum's magic is still in you. I can feel it sometimes when the anchor thing does its direction thing. It's warm. And then, without transition, Dad burned the leftover soup today because he was reading and forgot it was on the hob. Mum is furious." Harry folded that letter and held it for a long time in the dark of the cupboard. He'd been told about his parents in the way the Dursleys told him everything, as something to be ashamed of, or at least apologetic for. Unnatural. Freaks. Died in a car crash, which Harry had known was wrong for as long as he'd been able to know things, because there was knowing from outside and there was knowing in your chest, and his chest had always said otherwise. Tonks had told him differently. Not with grief for herself or for the narrative, with matter-of-fact acknowledgement of his loss. And the detail about his mother's magic, the warmth she could sense through the bond, that was his, that was specifically his, something that lived in him and could be felt and named. He pressed the coin against his sternum in the dark and pointed himself north-northwest and breathed. "I'm all right," he thought, not quite a message, just a fact sent into the warm space between them. More all right than I was. The summer Harry turned 9, Tonks came back. She was 8 now, taller by a couple of inches, with a nose she'd clearly been practicing on, slightly different each time he'd seen her in his imagination, though this was the first time he was seeing her in person, and she'd settled on a version that was maybe half a centimeter shorter than her natural one, just enough to be noticeable if you were looking for it. Her hair was pink. Had been, apparently, continuously. She came over the fence as she always had, but smoother this time, deliberate, controlled. She landed without a stumble, brushed her hands off, and looked at him standing by the roundabout with an expression that tried very hard to be casual and was completely undermined by the way her hair brightened to a color that didn't have a name yet when she saw him. "Hi," she said. "Hi," said Harry. They stood 6 feet apart in the morning sunshine and the air between them was full of a whole year's worth of letters, of copper hair and folded birds and the slow warm certainty of the anchor, and Harry felt something in his chest settle into place with a finality that was entirely different from the click of last July but related to it, the way a door settling shut is related to the turn of the key. Tonks crossed the 6 feet and sat on the roundabout and said, "Show me what you can do." Harry blinked. "What?" "Your magic. It's stronger, I can feel it, it's been getting stronger all year, the anchor's been pulling harder." She tilted her head. "Show me." Harry considered it. And then, because Tonks asked things directly and he'd learned from her that directness was its own kind of respect, he held his hand out, palm up, and reached, not for anything specific, just for the language of it, the feel of it, and a small bright sphere of light coalesced above his palm, steady and clear as a lamp, no flickering, no effort. Tonks stared at it. That's not a first-year spell. I don't know any first-year spells. I just do it. How long have you been able to do that? Harry thought. February. But it was small in February. Size of a marble. It's the size of a cricket ball now. I know. Tonks reached out and passed her hand through the light. She made a sound that was almost reverent. Harry, she said, very carefully, I think the anchor is doing something more than fixing my shifting. What do you think it's doing? She pulled her hand back and looked at him with those dark, too old eyes. I think it's feeding us, she said. Like. You anchor my shifting and I don't know. I make your magic bigger? Or more controlled? Something is flowing. She pressed a hand to her sternum. Right here. Something going both ways. Harry looked at the light in his palm. Fed back, steady as breath. Is that bad? He asked. Tonks thought about it genuinely, head tilted, chewing her lip, considering. Then she looked at him and the unnamed color blazed in her hair. No, she said. I don't think so. I think it's just what we are now. Harry closed his hand. The light didn't go out, it moved, shifting into his skin, settling warm below the surface. His magic humming quiet and satisfied. What we are, he said. What we are, Tonks confirmed. Somewhere behind them, over the fence and down the road, a door opened and Aunt Petunia called Harry's name in the tone that meant chores had been remembered. Harry didn't flinch. He turned toward the fence with the same unhurried movement of someone who knows exactly where he is and who he is and what he has. I'll be back in an hour, he told Tonks. I'll be here, she said. He went over the fence, not through the gate, not anymore, over it, in the clean arc that Tonks had shown him, and walked the 4 streets home, and the compass in his chest pointed back to the park, and his magic moved warm and certain through him, and the morning was full of light. Aunt Petunia stood at the kitchen door with her arms folded and the narrow look she reserved for Harry specifically, the one that tracked something she couldn't name. She looked at him. Something moved across her face, unease, maybe, or the thing that lives next to unease, which is the knowledge that something has changed and you were not consulted. The bins, she said. Yes, said Harry. He did the bins. He was back at the park in 45 minutes, not an hour. Tonks had changed her eye color to a green that was almost but not quite the color of his eyes, and when he asked about it she said it was an experiment and changed them to violet. Harry sat back on the roundabout that had started all of this, 12 months and 1 summer later, and watched the sunlight move through a day that had everything in it. Chapter 2, The Weight of Keeping Secrets. 3 years is a long time to keep a secret from a witch who already suspects. Andromeda Tonks had survived being disowned by the Black family at 17, had married a Muggle-born man in a climate that made that choice feel like a declaration of war, had raised a Metamorphmagus daughter through the specific chaos that involved, and had done all of it with the kind of quiet, iron-spined competence that people sometimes mistook for serenity. She was not serene. She was simply very good at knowing when to wait. She waited 3 years. On the morning of what would have been Nymphodora's 11th birthday, a Saturday in late July, the kitchen warm with the smell of the cake Ted was icing with more enthusiasm than precision, Andromeda sat across the breakfast table from her daughter and said, without preamble, "Tell me about the boy." Tonks's hair went from pink to white in under a second. Involuntary, which told Andromeda everything about how deep this went. "What boy?" Tonks said, and it was genuinely impressive. Her voice was steady, her expression was innocent, and only the white hair and the fact that she'd knocked her orange juice with her elbow and caught it without looking gave her away. "The one your magic points at," Andromeda said. The one it's been pointing at since that summer in London. Silence from across the table. Ted appeared in the kitchen doorway with a spatula and a hopeful expression, read the atmosphere, and quietly disappeared back into the hall. "Mom, I've been watching your magic for 3 years, Nymphadora." Andromeda kept her voice level, not unkind. "I know what a Metamorphmagus's baseline looks like. I know what yours looked like before that summer." The change was not gradual. It was a step change, one event, significant, and it happened in London. She paused. "I also know you've been corresponding with someone. The letters arrive without owls. They appear in books you're reading. Last winter one arrived folded into a bird and you kept the bird for 4 days before unfolding it." Tonks's jaw tightened. 11 was too old to be caught this easily and just old enough to know it. Her hair cycled through 3 colors and then, with visible effort, settled back to pink. "If I tell you," she said carefully, "you'll do something about it." "I will do something about it," Andromeda agreed. "The question is whether you trust my judgment about what that something should be." "Do I have a choice?" "You always have a choice. You'll tell me anyway because it's pressing against your ribs and you've been carrying it alone for 3 years and you're 11 today and I'm your mother and you are exhausted from keeping it." She reached across the table and covered Tonks's hand with her own. "Tell me." Tonks looked at their hands for a long moment. Then she looked up. "His name is Harry Potter," she said. The kitchen was very quiet. Andromeda did not move. She had, in the 3 years she'd been building toward this conversation, entertained possibilities. The name Harry Potter had occurred to her precisely once, dismissed as too enormous, too significant, too cosmically improbable. She'd decided it wasn't possible. "Tell me everything," she said. Her voice had not changed. She was very good at that. So Tonks told her. The fence. The gravel. The click. The letters. The coin. The light in Harry's palm the previous summer that had been the size of a cricket ball. She told it in the direct, economical way she told most things, no padding, no apology, just the facts arranged in order. The only thing that wasn't economical was what she said at the end. "He's the only person in the world my magic trusts," she said. "Not you. Not Dad. I love you both more than anything but my magic trusts him, and I don't know why, I just know it's true, and I'm not sorry and I'm not going to be sorry, and if you try to separate us my shifting's going to go back to rubbish and I'll be miserable and it won't even work because the anchor is the anchor and you can't unanchor something just by moving it." She stopped, breathless. Andromeda studied her daughter. 11 years old, pink-haired and fierce, sitting up very straight with her chin set at an angle that was pure black family stubbornness even if Andromeda would never say so aloud. "I'm not going to separate you," Andromeda said. Tonks blinked. "What?" "I said I'm not going to separate you. I'm going to go and meet him." Andromeda stood, smoothing her robes. "Today, if possible. Before you tell me what you think of that idea, consider that his alternative is number 4 Privet Drive, and whatever he has there, I have a fairly clear picture of what he doesn't." She walked to the hallway. "Ted," she called. "We're going to Little Whinging." "Right," Ted called back from wherever he'd been waiting with his spatula. "Should I bring the cake?" Number 4 Privet Drive was everything its postcode suggested, tidy, conformist, and wearing respectability like a mask over something else. Andromeda noticed it the moment she turned onto the street. The house had a particular magical atmosphere, not the warmth of charms freely cast but the tight, pressed quality of magic that had been suppressed and contained for years. Blood wards, yes, she could feel Lily Potter's work in them, old and deep and immovable, but underneath that something else. Something young and enormous that had been, not broken, but compressed. Like water behind a dam. She pressed the doorbell with her index finger and waited. The woman who opened the door had a neck like a very anxious crane and eyes that inventoried Andromeda in 3 seconds and found every possible reason to dislike her. Behind her, in the hallway, a very large boy stood eating a biscuit. "Yes?" Petunia Dursley said. "Mrs. Dursley," Andromeda said pleasantly. "My name is Andromeda Tonks. I'm a witch." She said it the way other people said I'm a solicitor, professionally, without emphasis. "I'd like to speak with Harry." The color that left Petunia Dursley's face could have been called extraordinary. The large boy in the hallway dropped his biscuit. "I don't, you can't just, I can, actually," Andromeda said. "And I'd prefer to do it civilly, at your kitchen table, with a cup of tea if you're willing. But I'll do it on the doorstep if you prefer. Your neighbors are very interested in doorsteps." She glanced mildly at the net curtain already twitching at the house across the road. Petunia's jaw worked. Then, with the mechanical stiffness of a woman operating entirely on social autopilot, she stepped aside. Harry was in the kitchen. Andromeda saw him before he saw her, standing at the hob, stirring something on automatic, thin in overlarge clothes, dark hair going every direction. He heard the footsteps and turned, and she saw his eyes, green, very bright, and in them that particular quality she'd been half expecting and half dreading. Not the wariness. Not the assessment, though that was there too, quick and practiced. The thing underneath. The settled thing. Even at 10 years old, Harry Potter already had the interior stillness of someone who knew exactly where his compass pointed. Then he saw Tonks behind her, and the stillness broke into something else entirely, bright, unhidden, briefly just a boy glad to see his person. Tonks went unnamed color in her hair and looked at the ceiling. "Harry," Andromeda said. "I'm Tonks's mother." "I know," Harry said. He looked at Tonks. "She told you." "I did," Tonks said. "Sorry." "Don't be." He turned off the hob. "I knew she would eventually." He looked at Andromeda with those disconcertingly steady eyes. "How much did she tell you?" "Enough," Andromeda said. "Sit down. I'd like to talk to you." He sat. This surprised her slightly. Most children at least hesitated before following an instruction from a stranger. Harry sat with the ease of someone who had decided she wasn't a threat, and she had the odd sensation of being assessed and cleared before she'd offered a word of proof. She sat across from him. Tonks dropped into the chair beside Harry with the familiar ease of years, and Andromeda noted the way Harry's magic, which she could feel now that she was close, warm and compressed and enormous for a 10-year-old, shifted slightly, easier, less damned, in Tonks's proximity. "Do you know what a Metamorphmagus anchor is?" Andromeda asked. "No," Harry said. "But I know what an anchor does. It keeps something in place. It gives something a fixed point." She laced her fingers together on the table. Metamorphmagi are, by magical nature, unstable. The magic is powerful but directionless. It responds to emotion, to intent, but without discipline it has no framework. Some metamorphmagi find their framework through training. Some never find it at all. She looked at her daughter. Very rarely, in historical cases you could count on one hand, a Metamorphmagus's magic encounters a magical signature so resonant, so fundamentally aligned, that it locks on. Spontaneously. Completely. "And that's what happened," Harry said. "Yes." She paused. The last recorded case was in the 15th century. A Metamorphmagus named Ira Vane, who encountered a wizard carrying a convergence of extremely powerful magic. Her magic anchored to his. She became one of the most powerful Metamorphmagi in recorded history. She kept her voice clinical, informational. The magical connection was not romantic. They were children when it happened, as you are. But it was permanent. And it was mutual. Mutual how? Harry asked. Andromeda looked at him carefully. Ira's wizard showed enhanced magical output, improved magical control, and a significantly elevated resistance to dark magic for the rest of his life. The anchor benefited both of them. She stopped. The risk is also bilateral. If one is significantly harmed, the other experiences it. If one were to die, Mum, Tonks said. He deserves to know, Andromeda said, not harshly. Harry's expression had not changed. He looked, if anything, more interested than alarmed. If one of us dies, he said, what happens to the other? In Ira's case, her anchor died in battle when they were both in their 40s. She survived. But her shifting ability diminished permanently. Andromeda watched him absorb this. She said, afterward, that the part that hurt most was not grief, grief is comprehensible, but the loss of direction. She had always known where he was. And then she didn't. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, distantly, a lawnmower started up. The Dursley boy had retreated, Andromeda noticed, probably to find a parent. Time was limited. I'm not going to pretend this is an ordinary situation, Andromeda said. You're Harry Potter. Your magical signature carries Lily's sacrificial magic and the mark of a curse that killed everything it's ever touched except you. That is, she chose her words precisely. That is an extraordinary thing for my daughter's magic to have chosen as its fixed point. I didn't choose it, Tonks said. My magic did. I know, Cariad. Andromeda looked at Harry. I'm not here to separate you or lecture you or make decisions on your behalf. You are 10 years old and someone has been doing all of those things since you were 15 months old and I have no interest in joining that queue. She paused. I am here because you deserve to know what the bond is. And because I would like, if you're willing, for you to know that you have somewhere to come if you need it. She glanced at the kitchen around them, the perfect surfaces, the absence of photographs, the too clean glass on the window. The particular quality of a house where one child is invisible. Here is clearly not that place. Harry looked at her. Then he looked at the table. Then he looked back at her with those eyes that were too old and too bright and too unsurprised by anything. Thank you, he said, and she heard in it the weight of 3 years of letters and a coin and a cupboard. Andromeda stood. The sound of Vernon Dursley's car pulling into the driveway vibrated through the kitchen wall. We'll be in touch, she said. Often. She picked up her bag. Tonks, say goodbye. Tonks had already turned to Harry with the efficient communication of people who have had years to develop their own shorthand. They looked at each other for 2 seconds. Something passed between them, not a word, not even the bond, just an understanding, compact and total. Later, Tonks said. Later, Harry agreed. They left through the back door before Vernon Dursley had finished turning off the engine. 2 weeks after Andromeda's visit, the letters got better. Not more frequent, they'd always been frequent, but richer, because Andromeda had given Harry his first wizarding books, slipped into the bottom of a bag of otherwise entirely muggle-looking school supplies she'd left on his doorstep with a note that said from a concerned neighbor, anonymous, which was technically true. Harry read with the focused intensity of someone who had been starving for information and finally found the pantry. He wrote to Tonks at odd hours and she wrote back at odder ones, and the letters now had a different quality, less about what they'd done and more about what they understood. Did you know about the Fidelius charm? Did you know what a Horcrux is? Did you know that Animagi are registered but Metamorphmagi aren't, and do you know why? Tonks wrote back, yes, no, and because you can't unbe what you already are, a Metamorphmagus is born not made, there's nothing to register because the magic is intrinsic. Like registering you for having your mum's eyes. Harry wrote, is that why you can't suppress it the way Muggleborns have to before Hogwarts? Tonks, I can suppress it but not completely and it gives me headaches. My mum says I shouldn't suppress it anyway, that fighting your nature is worse than managing it. Did you know that you've been doing wandless magic since you were a baby? I told Mum about the light ball and she went very quiet for a minute and then said something in Welsh. Harry, what did she say? Tonks, I'm not going to tell you because it'll go to your head. Harry, tell me. Tonks, she said you were remarkable. Don't be smug about it. He was slightly smug about it. He kept the letter with the copper hair. September came and Harry started the year at Stonewall Primary. That would be his last, though he didn't know that yet. He was 10 and a half and his magic was not subtle anymore. It hadn't been subtle for a year, it was just that he'd learned its manners, the way you learn the personality of a large, powerful dog that is loyal to you but needs to know you're confident or it'll start making decisions independently. He stopped 2 incidents in the school year that might have become front-page wizarding news had anyone with wizarding awareness been watching Stonewall Primary School. The first was Marcus Webb, Year 6, who cornered Harry behind the portable classrooms in October with the specific energy of someone who'd been told by Dudley that Harry was safe to bully. Harry waited until Marcus drew his arm back and then, without drama, met his eyes and let his magic surface, not explosively, not threateningly, just visible, a shimmer in the air around him, a brightness in those green eyes that was not quite natural. Marcus Webb's arm stayed where it was. His face went complex. "Don't," Harry said. Just that. Marcus left. He didn't come back. The second was the history teacher, Mr. Carver, who had developed the habit of calling on Harry only to disagree with his answers regardless of whether they were correct, which Harry had identified as a pattern and categorized without particular emotion. In November, during a lesson about the Blitz, Mr. Carver contradicted Harry's factually accurate account of the Anderson shelter system with a factually incorrect alternative, and Harry, who had spent 3 years reading everything Andromeda sent him and several things she hadn't, looked at him calmly and said, "That's not right." Mr. Carver stared at him. The Morrison shelter was designed for indoor use, inside the house, under the table. The Anderson shelter was for the garden. You've got them backwards. Mr. Potter, I can show you the source if you like. Harry produced from his school bag a Muggle library book about the Second World War, not a wizarding text, just a thoroughly non-magical library book, and set it on the desk with the relevant page open. He did all of this without aggression, without smiling, with just the level factual delivery of someone who has decided that being wrong about things quietly is no longer worth the effort. Mr. Carver did not apologize. But he did not call on Harry for the rest of the lesson, and he stopped contradicting him in December, and by January Harry had the front row to himself and a certain unmolested freedom to read what he liked between lessons. He wrote about it to Tonks that evening. "I think I've made my teacher afraid of me." Tonks, "Good. Is he an idiot?" Harry, "He's wrong about a lot of things." Tonks, "Same answer then. Dad says that the problem with people who are scared of being wrong is that they take it out on people who are right. You can't fix that by being quieter, you just make them think it works." Harry considered this. "Did your dad say that to you?" Tonks, "He said it to Mum about her family. But it applies." Harry, "Your Mum's family are the Blacks." Tonks, "Yes." Harry, "The Sacred 28. Tonks, "Yes. My mum left. Her family disowned her. My cousin Sirius." There was a longer gap than usual between that letter and the next one. When it came, it had been through several drafts, Harry could tell. The sentences had the slightly over-smoothed quality of things that had been rewritten. "My cousin Sirius is in Azkaban for something I don't think he did. Mum won't talk about it directly. She cries at Christmas when she thinks I'm asleep. He was supposed to be your godfather. Did you know that?" Harry held that letter for a long time. He hadn't known. He hadn't known about Sirius Black at all. Dumbledore's letter, delivered to Petunia and Vernon before Harry was old enough to read it, had been comprehensively hidden. He'd found references in the history books Andromeda sent him but nothing specific. The name in the letter now had weight. "I didn't know," he wrote back. "Tell me about him." So she did. In letters over the following weeks she sketched Sirius for him, reckless and brilliant and fiercely protective, best friend of James Potter, a Black who had gotten off the train at the wrong stop and never gone back. Who had, at 21, in the aftermath of the worst night of his life, been arrested without trial and sent to a prison designed to eat people alive. "He's been there for 9 years, Tonks wrote. He's been there since that night. Since, you know. Since your parents. Harry lay in his cupboard and stared at the ceiling and thought about a man he'd never met who was supposed to have held him and taken him to Hogwarts and taught him things fathers teach sons. He felt something about it that wasn't grief exactly. Grief required a prior knowledge of what was lost, and he'd never had the thing to lose, but was adjacent to grief. The outline of a life that had been removed before he'd seen its shape. He didn't get a trial, he wrote. No, Tonks replied. Mum has tried. Other people have tried. There's a lot of political, I'll explain it better when I understand it better. But basically Voldemort's people had friends in the ministry, and after the war those friends made sure Sirius never got to stand up in a courtroom and say anything. Harry thought about this for 3 days. Then he wrote, when I'm old enough. When I have the standing. I'll get him out. The next letter came back within the hour, which was unusually fast. You've never even met him. Harry, he was supposed to be my godfather. My parents trusted him with me. That's enough. A long pause. Then, I told Mum what you said. Harry, what did she say? Tonks, she cried. Different crying than the Christmas crying. She says you're more like your father than you know. Harry, is that a good thing? Tonks, she's smiling while she's crying, so yes. Spring arrived in fits and starts, cold and then warm and then cold again, and Harry was almost 11 and his magic was doing things that had begun to attract a different kind of attention than Mr. Carver or Marcus Webb. He became aware of the awareness gradually. A man in a brown coat reading the same newspaper on the same corner 3 mornings in a row. A woman on the bus who he'd never seen in the neighborhood but who was always already there when he arrived at the stop. Neither of them did anything. They just watched, with the practiced casualness of professional watchers, and Harry, who had spent his whole life developing peripheral awareness as survival, clocked them and filed them and wrote to Tonks. She wrote back, I know. Mum knows too. She thinks it's Dumbledore. Harry, why would Dumbledore be watching me? Tonks, because you're Harry Potter and your magic is getting very visible and he's the kind of person who likes to know things before they happen. He's been watching you since you were dropped off at the Dursleys. Harry thought about this. He knew about Dumbledore, the books Andromeda had sent him covered that ground, and had formed a view that was not uncomplicated. He understood the man was likely operating from genuine concern and a genuine vision of the greater good. He also understood, with the particular clarity of someone who had been managed from a distance for a decade, that concern and respect for autonomy were not the same thing. Let him watch, he wrote. I'm not doing anything wrong. Tonks, that's not really the point with Dumbledore. He watches because he's planning things. He's very good at planning things. Harry, then let him plan. When he wants to talk to me directly, he can come and do it. Tonks, you're not even 11 and you're already doing the immovable object thing. Harry, what immovable object thing? Tonks, the thing where you just wait. Calmly. Until the other person does what you've decided they'll do eventually. Dad says Mum does it. He says it's the most unnerving quality a person can have. Harry, it works. Tonks, terrifyingly well, yes. The man in the brown coat disappeared at the end of April. The woman at the bus stop lasted until the first week of May and then she too was gone, and Harry filed this information under Patience Rewarded and got on with revising for his end-of-year exams, which he was going to pass because he had spent 3 years reading Andromeda. Tonks's book recommendations and Stonewall Primary School's curriculum was, by comparison, somewhat limited in scope. He passed. Top of his year, with a margin that made his teacher look at him with the complicated expression of someone who has had to revise their model of a person they'd been condescending to for 4 years. Harry collected his report card, said a bland thank you, and went home to pack his cupboard with the efficiency of someone who had very little to pack. His Hogwarts letter arrived 3 weeks later. It did not come by owl. It appeared on the pillow of his cupboard, which meant either the owl had been extraordinarily small and silent, or someone had delivered it by hand, or the letter itself had found him through some other mechanism. Harry picked it up and looked at the seal, wax, Hogwarts crest, his full name and the specific detail of the cupboard under the stairs, which meant whoever addressed this had known exactly where he slept. That was meaningful information. He filed it. He opened the letter and read it, and then he tapped the coin in his pocket 3 times, quickly, which was their signal for "I have news, find somewhere private." 20 minutes later he heard, on the outside of the cupboard door, 3 soft taps back. He opened the door carefully. Tonks was crouched in the Dursleys' hallway, in the shadows near the coat rack, wearing the face of someone slightly different, hair dark, not pink, features just mildly shifted, not Tonks as she normally appeared but Tonks in traveling incognito. She looked at him and her hair immediately went pink at the roots. "When did you get here?" Harry breathed. "Just now. Sighed along with Mum, she dropped me at the corner." She looked at the letter in his hand. "Is that it?" "Yes." She scanned it with him in the narrow hallway, their heads close together, and Harry could feel her magic warm and alert alongside his. He heard the slight catch in her breath at the cupboard under the stairs. "That's where you sleep," she said quietly. "Yes." "Harry, I know," he said, before she could say the rest of it, the thing she'd been circling for 3 years. He'd always stopped the conversation here because the truth of it was something he knew and had always known, and the knowing didn't require repetition. He could see it in her face now though, the thing she'd been sitting on, the combination of anger and guilt and the particular helpless fury of someone who knows something is wrong and has been unable to fix it. "Next year," he said. "When I go to Hogwarts I sleep in a dormitory." He held up the letter. "See? All it took was a letter. That is not funny. It's slightly funny." "It is not." Her voice was low and fierce and her hair had gone through pink to red without stopping. "You've been sleeping in a cupboard, Harry, for 10 years, and my mum is going to absolutely— Your mum is going to what?" said Andromeda Tonks from the front doorway, which she had opened silently in the manner of someone who had not trusted her 11-year-old daughter to behave herself and had decided to supervise. Tonks and Harry both looked at her. Andromeda looked at the cupboard door, still open. At the narrow space inside with the small mattress and the books stacked carefully on the floor and the copper hair in a fold of parchment on the shelf, and the loose floorboard and the coin and the single photograph Harry had, which was not of the Dursleys but of a park in Magnolia Crescent printed from a Muggle camera he'd found at a car boot sale, taken on the approximate anniversary of the first Tuesday. Her face did something that Harry had only ever seen Ted Tonks's face do in a letter Tonks had described, a deep, private rearranging, the kind that happened below the social layer, in the place where real things lived. Then it closed again, professional and precise. "Nymphadora," she said, "go wait outside." "Mum, outside, please." Tonks looked at Harry. Harry gave her the small nod that meant "It's fine, go." She went, though her hair was blazing an extremely complex color sequence that communicated her feelings on the matter without ambiguity. Andromeda crouched down slightly so she was at Harry's eye level. She looked at him for a moment with those dark eyes that Tonks had inherited, seeing, cataloging, and behind all of that, something warm and genuinely furious on his behalf. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to answer me honestly." "All right," Harry said. "Did you want to go to Hogwarts, or did someone decide that for you?" Harry thought about it seriously, which she clearly expected him to, which was one of the things about Andromeda Tonks that Harry had always appreciated. She asked questions that required actual thought and then waited for the thought. "I want to go," he said. "I'd want to know magic properly even if it wasn't Hogwarts. But I also think Hogwarts is where something's going to happen and I'd rather be there when it does than somewhere else hearing about it." "Something being Voldemort," Andromeda said, without flinching. "Something being whatever the mark on my head is still connected to," Harry said, and touched the scar on his forehead once, briefly, professionally. "The books you sent me were informative." Andromeda looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood. "I'm going to speak with Albus Dumbledore," she said. Directly. About several things. She looked at the cupboard once more. You'll stay with us for the remainder of the summer. I'll handle the Dursleys. They won't agree. Mrs. Dursley, Andromeda said, with a smile that was polite in exactly the way that a very sharp knife is polite, is a woman who is extremely concerned with what her neighbors think of her. I intend to have a conversation with her on the front doorstep on a sunny afternoon when I know at least 4 of those neighbors are outdoors. She adjusted her bag strap. She'll agree. Harry looked at her. He thought about what Tonks had said 3 years ago, my mum will do something adult about it. He'd been afraid of that then. He was not afraid of it now. Thank you, he said. For the second time, to her. But this thank you was different from the first one. This one had less weight and more of something else, something he didn't have a precise word for, that lived in the neighborhood of warmth and was related to but distinct from gratitude. Andromeda nodded briskly and went to the front door. Harry heard the exchange with Petunia conducted in 2 voices, Petunia's rising and thin, Andromeda's level and unhurried, with the front door open and the sound of at least 2 separate garden activities happening within earshot on the Dursley street. It took 11 minutes. Then Andromeda came back inside and said, simply, pack your things. Harry picked up his books and his photograph and his coin and his folded copper hair and put them in his school bag and walked out of number 4 Privet Drive without looking back. Tonks was outside on the pavement. She'd let her hair go fully pink again in the open air. She looked at him with his schoolbag over one shoulder and his eyes very bright and something loosened about his shoulders that she'd always been aware of as a tension but had never seen its absence before. Come on, then, she said. Right, said Harry. Ted Tonks was parked at the end of the road in a car that had been enchanted, Harry quickly understood, to be approximately twice as large on the inside as was physically possible. He was a broad, cheerful man with Tonks's eyes and a voice that filled rooms comfortably, and when Harry got in the back seat he looked at him in the rearview mirror and said, "So you're the famous Harry." "Ted," Andromeda said mildly, from the passenger seat. "I'm just saying. 3 years of letters and coins and folded bird letters. He's been very present in this house for a person who's never been to it." He grinned at Harry in the mirror. "You look like your dad, by the way." "Very much." "Ted," Andromeda said again. "I'll stop." He didn't stop. "Your dad was a terrific bloke. I only met him twice. The second time he transfigured my tie into a goldfish for a laugh and I kept the goldfish for 6 years. He paused, apparently reconsidering the wisdom of this story. It was a nice goldfish. Harry found, for the second time in a day, that he was smiling without being aware of having started. Tonks sat beside him in the back seat with their shoulders touching and the compass in his chest settled and pointed at no other direction but here, in a car driving north through the English summer morning. "Mum's going to yell at Dumbledore," she said, under the cover of Ted's radio. "I know. Aren't you worried?" Harry considered Albus Dumbledore, the books, the history, the man in the brown coat on the corner and the woman at the bus stop and the address on the Hogwarts letter that said the cupboard under the stairs, which meant he had known and had calculated that leaving Harry there was an acceptable cost. "No," Harry said. Tonks looked at him sidelong. The sun was full through the car window and her hair was the unnamed color it went when she was feeling something large. "He's very powerful," she said. "I know. And influential. And old. And he's been planning things for years." "I know that too. And you're not worried?" "He's been leaving me in a cupboard for 10 years because he decided it was necessary," Harry said. "The question isn't whether he's powerful. The question is whether he gets to keep making decisions about my life without my input. And the answer to that is no." He looked out the window at the English countryside opening up beyond the motorway. "Starting now." The unnamed color blazed in Tonks's hair for one long moment. Then she leaned her head against his shoulder, very briefly, and looked out her own window. The car drove north. Chapter 3, The King's Road Diagon Alley on a Wednesday morning in late July smelled like candle wax, old leather, and the particular excitement of a place that exists just beside the world most people live in. Harry had read about it. Tonks had described it in letters: the crooked buildings, the cauldron shop, the owls and their cages outside Elops, the way Gringotts sat at the top of the street like a statement of intent. He'd built a picture from words, and now he walked into the real version and found it was both smaller and more overwhelming than he'd imagined, the way real things generally are. He didn't gawk. He looked, steadily, the way he looked at everything, taking it in and filing it without performing his reaction for anyone's benefit. Beside him Tonks walked with the easy familiarity of someone who'd been here dozens of times, her hair tucked under a glamour because Andromeda had asked, "Just while we're in public, the pink draws attention," and she was wearing a face that was technically hers but slightly adjusted, just enough to be unrecognizable to casual acquaintance. She was 11 and already moved through crowds like a shadow. Harry moved through them like something else. Not a shadow. More like a current. The crowd shifted around him without quite knowing why, and people who were about to bump into him found themselves a half step to the side and looked faintly confused about it. Andromeda walked on his left with her hand not on his shoulder but near it, and Ted was on the right, attempting to read a wizarding joke shop display and walk at the same time. "We'll start with Gringotts," Andromeda said. "You'll need access to your vault before anything else." "I have a vault," Harry said. "Your family has a vault," Andromeda said. "Your parents' estate was held in trust. You have access from age 11. She paused. "It's substantial." Harry absorbed this without visible reaction, though internally he was recalibrating several things simultaneously. He'd spent 10 years in a house where money was used as leverage. "We clothe you and feed you and you cost more than you're worth," and the idea that there had always been a vault, always been an estate, always been resources that were his and being held from him, settled somewhere complicated in his chest. Not complicated like grief. Complicated like resolved. "All right," he said. "Gringotts first." The bank was exactly as imposing as advertised and the goblins were exactly as unbothered by human opinions as Tonks had described. The one who processed Harry's access request looked at the key Andromeda produced, which she'd been holding since shortly before Dumbledore had arrived to collect it 11 years ago, as Harry would learn later, and then looked at Harry with yellow eyes that were not unfriendly so much as comprehensively beyond the concept of friendliness. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. "Yes," Harry said. "Vault 687 and the secondary holdings." The goblin produced a ledger. "Your parents' personal vault, the Potter family vault, and the trust vault established in your name." He slid the ledger across. "Current holdings, for your review." Harry looked at the numbers. He kept his expression neutral with some effort. "Could you explain the difference between the 3 vaults?" he asked. The goblin, Ragnarok, his name badge said, though the badge seemed somewhat beneath his dignity, looked at him with what might, in a goblin, have been a fractional increase in interest. "Most clients your age do not ask that question." "I'm asking," Ragnarok explained, with the efficient precision of someone who respected people who asked specific questions, the difference between the trust vault, his immediate expenses, school supplies, and the like, the personal vault which was James and Lily's day-to-day holdings, and the Potter family vault which was generational, older, and considerably larger, and which Harry could access fully at 17. "The trust vault is sufficient for today's purposes," Andromeda said. "The trust vault is sufficient," Harry agreed, "and I'd also like to set up a monthly transfer arrangement for a separate account, if that's possible." Andromeda looked at him. "For what purpose?" Ragnarok asked. "I'd like to make a monthly payment to an account I'll specify. Beginning immediately." Harry had been thinking about Sirius Black for 6 months and he had spent some of that thinking productively. "Can you tell me whether the vaults of convicted wizards are accessible?" The silence in the Gringotts office was of the particularly meaningful kind. "Harry," Andromeda said. "The Black family vault," Harry said. "Not the family vault, Sirius Black's personal vault." He's been in Azkaban for 9 years and whatever's in it has been sitting untouched. I'd like to ensure that if and when he gets out, he has immediate access to funds, and that in the meantime some portion is directed toward his legal representation. Ragnarok looked at him for a long moment. Then he made a note in the ledger with the air of someone adding a footnote to an already interesting document. Sirius Black's personal vault is frozen pending his conviction, Ragnarok said. Standard procedure for Azkaban inmates. A pause. However, a convicted individual's legal costs can be paid from an external account directly to a legal representative without the convicted vault needing to be unfrozen. We can facilitate that arrangement. Then let's do that, Harry said. Ted Tonks, standing near the door, made a sound like someone swallowing a laugh. Andromeda's expression had shifted into something complicated and professional and very warm underneath. They went down to the vault in the cart. Tonks gripped the side of it with the white-knuckled intensity of someone who would never admit to finding it slightly terrifying and was apparently reliving previous experiences, and Harry looked at the stacked coins with the focused appraisal of someone doing arithmetic and not with the gaping wonder that the vault perhaps expected to produce. He took what he needed. He did not dawdle. Back on the street, in the morning sunshine, Andromeda said, the legal representation arrangement was well thought out. It's been 6 months in progress, Harry said. I just needed access to the account. You've been planning it since my letter, Tonks said. She wasn't asking. Since your letter, Harry confirmed. He looked up the street toward the leaky cauldron end. Wand first, or books? Wand, Andromeda said firmly. Always the wand first. Without it you can't use anything else. I've been doing things without a wand for 10 years, Harry said, not argumentatively, just noting it. Then the wand will be a refinement, Andromeda said, with the particular tone of someone who has heard a reasonable point and is filing it for later. Ollivander's was narrow and dusty and had the specific atmosphere of a place that had been accumulating its own importance for centuries. The man who appeared from between the shelves was old in the way that extremely magical people are old, not fragile but layered, like the rings of an oak. Garrick Ollivander looked at Harry with pale eyes that catalogued him in the way goblins' eyes catalogued financial instruments, and for a moment Harry had the odd sensation that he was being read rather than seen. Mr. Potter, Ollivander said. I wondered when I'd see you. He paused. I was present, in a manner of speaking, at your first magical event. The wand chooses the wizard, but some wizards have wands that are already waiting for them. He moved along the shelves with the assurance of someone navigating a very familiar dark. Hold out your wand arm. Harry held out his right hand. Ollivander measured him in a way that involved a tape measure operating independently, and then began the process, box after box, each wand tried, each producing nothing, or sparks that died, or a single flower that bloomed from a plant nearby and was adjudged insufficient. Tonks watched from near the door with her arms folded and her hair a focused gold. She did gold when she was concentrating, Harry had noticed over the years, though she probably wasn't aware of it. On the 12th attempt, Ollivander paused. He looked at Harry, then at the shelf above his head, then back at Harry with an expression that was not quite readable but had uncertainty in it, which was evidently unusual for him. There is a wand, he said slowly, that I have not offered to anyone. 11 inches, holly, phoenix feather. He stopped. The phoenix who gave the feather gave only one other, and that wand, well. He looked at Harry's forehead. I know, Harry said. You know. Books, Harry said. Mrs. Tonks sends excellent books. Ollivander retrieved the wand from a high shelf. It had dust on the box, genuinely undisturbed, and something about that was significant though Harry couldn't have said why, and set it in Harry's palm. The warmth was immediate and total. Not the click of 3 years ago, not the gradual warmth of the coin, this was affirmation, the particular magic of a thing recognizing its proper place. The air in the shop moved, warm and circular, lifting the dust off the shelves momentarily and settling it again, and every candle in the place brightened for exactly 1 second. Ollivander looked at him with those pale eyes. Curious, he said. Is it? Harry said. You aren't surprised. I'm surprised a little, Harry said honestly. I thought it might be louder. Ollivander made a sound that was, in an elderly wand-maker who had seen extraordinary things for 8 decades, the equivalent of a bark of laughter. The loud ones are not always the most powerful, he said. Some magic knows it doesn't need to perform. He held out the box. 7 galleons, Mr. Potter, and do take care of it. I will, Harry said. He meant it. Outside on the cobbles, Tonks fell into step beside him and said, Well? Harry held the wand loosely at his side and felt it hum, quiet and attentive, against his palm. Like it was already mine, he said. Because it was. She looked at the wand. Can I see? He handed it to her without hesitation. She held it carefully, turned it over, and her expression went very still for a moment, feeling, Harry guessed, whatever a non-owner felt from someone else's wand. It's warm, she said. She handed it back, and when his fingers closed around it again he felt the difference. It had been slightly duller in her hand, like a compass not pointed home. It likes you, she said. Most things do, eventually. Tonks gave him a sideways look. Did you just make a joke? I make jokes. You don't make jokes. I make quiet jokes. You miss them. He paused. That's your problem. She made a noise of profound affronted dignity and her hair went through 3 colors. Ted Tonks, walking ahead with Andromeda, turned around and observed his daughter's color display and looked deeply entertained. Robes now, Andromeda called back. Madame Malkin's, quickly, before the morning crowd. Madame Malkin's was full. Not unusually, it was high summer, the school rush was on, and the fitting area was occupied by a stream of parents and children ranging from first-year terrified to 7th-year comprehensively bored. Harry had his measurements taken by a tape measure that operated independently and was guided to a fitting platform near the window. 2 platforms over, a boy with very blonde hair and extremely new-looking dress robes was being fitted with the specific energy of someone who expected to be admired. Harry noted him in the way he noted everything and returned his attention to the window and the street outside, where a group of wizards in dark green robes were arguing loudly about something to do with brooms. Hogwarts, the blonde boy said, appearing to have decided that Harry's inattention was an invitation. Harry looked at him. Yes. First year? Yes. The boy visibly reassessed. He'd been expecting more, Harry could see, more reaction to the blonde hair and the good robes and the practiced drawl. He was the kind of boy who expected his presence to produce an effect. Draco Malfoy, he said. Harry Potter, Harry said, and watched the effect that produced, because it was relevant information. Draco Malfoy blinked. His eyes went to Harry's forehead, to the fringe that covered the scar, with the instinctive magnetism of someone who has heard a story many times and is now encountering the artifact. Then he reorganized himself, which he did fairly quickly. Harry noted, he was not stupid. I'd heard you were being raised by muggles, Draco said. Partially true, Harry said. Well. Draco's tone had the careful quality of someone feeling out a new social landscape. It's probably best to know the right sort from the start, at Hogwarts. I can help with that. Harry looked at him. Not unkindly, there wasn't enough malice in Draco Malfoy at 11 to earn unkindness, just a great deal of performance and the particular insecurity of a boy who has been told he is important rather than shown he is capable. Harry had spent 3 years reading people because people in the Dursley household had been threat or neutral and the distinction was survival. He read Draco in about 45 seconds. I'm fine for introductions, Harry said. But thank you. Draco blinked again. He'd expected, Harry thought, either deference or antagonism, and had a script for both. He didn't have a script for comfortable dismissal. The wrong sort, Draco said, pivoting to a different angle, can really limit your options. Blood status matters at Hogwarts more than people like to admit publicly. The two most impressive magical people I know are a Muggle-born and a half-blood, Harry said. He was still watching the street. Blood status is a way for people with limited ability to feel relevant. The silence from the next platform had a very specific quality. My father, Draco started. I'm sure he has opinions, Harry said. Most people do. Madame Malkin appeared between them with the timing of someone who had diffused a dozen of these encounters and considered it part of the service. All done for you, dear, she told Harry, and helped him down from the platform with the brisk efficiency of experience. Harry collected his robes, folded them over one arm, and walked to the door where Tonks was leaning against the frame with her arms folded and an expression of pure enjoyment. Blood status is a way for people with limited ability to feel relevant, she repeated, in a murmur. It's true, Harry said. I know it's true. It was spectacular. She pushed off the doorframe and fell into step with him. He's a Malfoy. That family has very long memories and a lot of money. I know who he is. And you don't care. I care to know what he is, Harry said. He's 11 and performing everything his father told him to perform. Whether he stays that way is his choice. He paused. I didn't make an enemy on purpose. I just didn't make a friend on his terms. Tonks considered this. You know that in September, at Hogwarts, the social dynamics are, Tonks. What? I've been navigating social dynamics designed to diminish me since I was old enough to understand what diminish meant, Harry said. Hogwarts will be fine. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Gave him the look she gave him when he said something that she wanted to argue with but couldn't find the argument for. Fine, she said. Thank you. Stop being right about things. That's probably not going to happen, Harry said, and she shoved him sideways gently and her hair went briefly, involuntarily, the unnamed color, and they walked into the Diagon Alley sunshine after Andromeda and Ted. Books were next, and Harry moved through Flourish and Blots the way he moved through most things, purposefully and efficiently and slightly ahead of schedule. He had a list and he bought everything on it and then stood in the back corner of the shop for a solid 15 minutes with a book that was not on the first-year list and that Andromeda had been about to nudge him past. It was a wizarding legal text. Recent edition. Wizarding law, rights, recourse, and the proceedings of the Wisengamot. That's not a pleasure read, Ted said, appearing at his elbow. No, Harry agreed, reading the index. You're 11. The index cross-references unlawful imprisonment under Section 43 and the requirements for post-conviction appeal. Harry didn't look up. Sirius Black was imprisoned without trial, which means no conviction, which means technically Section 43 doesn't apply in the standard sense. He paused at a subheading. But there's a provision here for wrongful committal under emergency wartime powers that was never reviewed after the war ended. If the emergency powers were used as justification for bypassing a trial, and those powers were never formally extended or reviewed, then the original committal is legally unsupported. He looked up. He might not even need an appeal. He might need someone to challenge the original order. Ted Tonks stared at him for a moment. Then he turned and called, mildly, Andy. Come and see what Harry's found. Andromeda came and read the section Harry indicated and then stood very still in the Flourish and Blots back corner with the legal text in her hand. I had a solicitor look at this 2 years ago, she said. What section? Section 43. The standard appeal route. She looked at the subheading Harry had found. This provision is 4 pages past where the standard analysis stops, Harry said. Your solicitor probably didn't read past the standard framework. Andromeda looked at him. Her expression was the one she reserved for moments when Harry did something that recalibrated her understanding of what 11 could look like. I'd like to buy this, Harry said. And send a copy to the solicitor. We will do both of those things, Andromeda said, and her voice had the particular controlled quality of someone running strong emotion on a very tight rein. Harry added the legal text to his stack without fanfare and went to find Tonks, who was in the defense section reading the back cover of a book about counterjinxes with the focused expression she wore when she'd found something useful. He stood beside her and they read the shelves in companionable silence, pulling books down and replacing them with the shared shorthand of people who have been doing this, in letters, at least, for 3 years. "This one," Harry said, handing her a book on advanced magical theory. "I've read it," she said. "Second edition?" She looked. "No. Second edition has a chapter on innate magical phenomena." He paused. "Metamorphmagi are mentioned. Anchoring is in the footnotes." She turned it over and found the footnote reference on the back. Her hair went an involuntary excited gold. "Did you already read the second edition?" "Andromeda had it. I read it in June." "What does it say about anchoring?" "It says it's extremely rare, poorly understood, and that both participants typically demonstrate magical capabilities that exceed their baseline significantly." He paused. "It also says that the emotional resonance between anchor pairs tends to compound over time." Tonks put the book in her own stack. "Compound how?" The author wasn't specific. She said it was underdocumented because anchor pairs don't present to academic study willingly. He looked at her. "Which makes sense. Because they don't want to be separated and studied." "Because they don't want to be separated and studied," Harry confirmed. Tonks looked at her book stack, then at his, then at him. "Harry." "Yes?" "You read everything." "I had time," Harry said. "And your mum sends excellent books." She almost said something. Then she shook her head in the way she did when she was capitulating to the general phenomenon of Harry, and they carried their stacks to the front of the shop. The afternoon moved through cauldrons and scales and potion ingredients with the pleasant efficiency of a morning's work approaching its end, and Harry was standing outside Elop's Owl Emporium looking at the owls in their cages with the detached appraisal of someone who has received letters by unusual means for 3 years and is now reconsidering logistics, when he became aware of being watched. Not the trained watcher quality of the man in the brown coat or the woman at the bus stop. Different. Closer. And not trying to hide it. He turned. Albus Dumbledore was standing 15 feet away in Diagon Alley, wearing robes of deep blue and an expression that was carefully benign. He was carrying no purchases. He had not, Harry understood immediately, come to Diagon Alley by coincidence. He looked older than the portraits in books. More tired. And in his eyes, as he looked at Harry, there was something that was not entirely calculation, something genuinely warm, and genuinely complicated by the warmth, as though the warmth and the calculation were in a long-standing argument with each other. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "I hope your morning has been productive." "Very," Harry said. He didn't move. He held the wand in its box under his arm and the coin warm in his pocket, and his magic was, in the way it always was now, present and patient and entirely unimpressed. Dumbledore's eyes went briefly to the Tonks family, Andromeda, who had turned and was watching with an expression of controlled steel, Ted, who had placed himself mildly between the girls and the street, Tonks, who had dropped her glamour entirely and whose hair had gone a color that was not quite red and not quite orange but was definitively alert. "Andromeda," Dumbledore said. "Albus," Andromeda said, and her voice had the particular temperature of a very cold day. "I'd hoped to speak with Harry before he had access to his vaults and his legal standing and a responsible adult who'd actually read the relevant sections of wizarding law." Andromeda asked. "Yes. I imagine the timing is inconvenient." Dumbledore looked at her with the patience of someone very accustomed to people being angry at him. "The choices I made were made for reasons that, you put him in a cupboard, Albus," Andromeda said, and the sentence was quiet and clean and had absolutely no performance in it. Just the fact, placed between them like a stone. "The blood wards can be maintained without the cupboard." Silence. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked at Dumbledore. The afternoon moved around them, shoppers passing, an owl arguing with a finch 3 cages over, the distant clatter of the cauldron shop. Harry studied the old man with the same focused patience he'd applied to Draco Malfoy and Marcus Webb and Mr. Carver, and what he found was not what he'd expected. Not a villain. Not even a bureaucrat. A man who had made a very long series of decisions starting from a genuine place and had walked far enough down that road that the starting place was now difficult to see from here. "I'd like to talk to you," Harry said. "But not here. And not today." He paused. "At Hogwarts. At the start of term. You can tell me what you think I need to know and I'll tell you what I think you should know, and we'll go from there." Dumbledore blinked. It was, Harry noted, not a common expression on him, the slight adjustment of expectation. "I think that's a very mature approach," Dumbledore said. "It's a practical one," Harry said. "I'm not angry at you. I'm just not going to let you manage me." He adjusted the wand box under his arm. "There's a difference." Another silence. The light was golden in the late afternoon and Diagon Alley moved and lived around them, and Dumbledore looked at Harry with those complicated eyes for a long moment, and in them Harry could see the recognition, specific and slightly reluctant, of something he hadn't anticipated. "Your father," Dumbledore said, softly, "used to say something very similar. Usually immediately before doing something I'd specifically advised against." A pause. "He was usually right." "I'll be at Hogwarts September 1st, Harry said. "First week of term." "Your office." "I'll expect you," Dumbledore said, and something in the line of him shifted, the careful benignity becoming something more genuine, less performed. He nodded to Andromeda. "I imagine we have things to discuss as well." "At length," Andromeda confirmed. Dumbledore moved away down the alley, robes settling behind him, and was absorbed by the afternoon crowd with the easy practice of someone who had been doing this, navigating, appearing, disappearing, for a very long time. Tonks appeared at Harry's shoulder. "You just told Dumbledore to wait. He was going to talk to me on his terms, in a public street, where I'd have to be grateful for whatever information he chose to share," Harry said. "So I moved it to neutral ground on my schedule. He's the most powerful wizard in Britain." "I know." Harry turned toward the owl shop. "But he doesn't get to manage me. I said that clearly." Tonks looked at the space where Dumbledore had been. Her hair had gone through its alert color and was settling back to pink, and her expression had the particular quality it got when she was revising her model of something, opening a new category, filing him somewhere unexpected. "You're not afraid of anything," she said. "I'm afraid of some things," Harry said. "Name one." He thought about the cupboard in winter. He thought about the compass pointing north-northwest, and then, the thought he'd had once, alone, age 9, at 2 in the morning, not pointing anywhere at all. He thought about Tonks's letter, the one about Ira Vane, the part about the loss of direction. "Losing the compass," he said. Tonks went very still. "Not you," he added, with the careful precision that meant he'd thought about this. The fact of knowing where you are. The direction." He looked at the owl shop window. "I don't think he stopped. Started again. It's the one thing I'd mind." "Harry," she said, and it was the quiet version of his name, the one she only used when the thing she was saying was too large for her other voice. "It's fine," he said. "It's not going to happen." "No," she said, with absolute certainty. "It's not." They went into the owl shop, and Harry found, on a high perch in the back corner, a snowy owl that looked at him with large amber eyes and the immediate settled certainty of a wand in a matching palm, and he held up his arm and she stepped onto it as though she'd been waiting for him to arrive. "She needs a name," Ted said. "Hedwig," Harry said. He'd had it ready, from a history book, a name he'd held in reserve for exactly this purpose without quite knowing he was doing it. A saint's name. A name from a different kind of story. Hedwig made a sound of profound satisfaction and settled her feathers and looked at Tonks with the evaluating expression of a bird making a judgment. Tonks held out her hand. Hedwig sniffed it, then very deliberately turned her head away. She doesn't like me, Tonks said. She'll warm up, Harry said. I'm very likable. To most people, Harry agreed. Give her a week. Tonks looked at the owl with the narrowed eyes of someone accepting a challenge. Hedwig looked back with complete, magnificent serenity. Ted Tonks paid for the cage. I'm buying the cage, Harry, don't argue, it's a birthday present except your birthday was in July and I forgot and this is the correction, and Harry carried Hedwig out into the late afternoon Diagon Alley on his arm. The alley was thinning as the afternoon stretched toward evening. The golden light made everything look like a story, and Harry stood in the middle of it with his wand and his owl and his new robes and his legal text and the coin warm in his pocket, and felt, for the first time in his memory, like someone standing at the beginning of something rather than in the middle of an ending that had started before he was old enough to know it. Tonks stood beside him, pink-haired and alive with unspent energy, and said, "Train leaves September 1st. I know. You're going to be sorted into a house." She paused. "I have opinions about which one." "Tell me." "Not Slytherin," she said. "Even though you could, I think you could talk the Sorting Hat into anything." She paused. "Not Hufflepuff, even though you're loyal, more than people see, but it's not your leading thing. Not Ravenclaw, though you've read enough for 3 Ravenclaws." She chewed her lip. "Gryffindor. Because of my parents. Because of you. Because of the way you walked into Madame Malkin's and the way you talked to Dumbledore and the way you sat on a roundabout at age 8 and let someone crash into you and said I didn't mind and meant it." She looked at him. "You lead with your chest, Harry. Always have." Harry looked up the alley. Gringotts gleamed at the far end, white and certain. "What if the hat disagrees?" "Then argue with it," Tonks said, as though this were obvious. Harry thought about arguing with the Sorting Hat and found he didn't find it a strange idea at all. "Come on," he said. "Your dad looks like he's about to buy a trick cauldron and your mum is going to be unhappy about it." Ted Tonks, visible through the window of the joke shop they'd been passing, was in fact holding up a cauldron with a suspicious dent in it and a price tag that suggested it would do something unexpected. "Dad," Tonks said, already moving, "put it down." "I'm just looking, you always say you're just looking." "And then I just buy the thing," Ted agreed cheerfully, "and your mother is always right about it." He put the cauldron down. "It would have made excellent purple soup." "We don't need purple soup," Andromeda said, appearing with perfect timing. "We never need purple soup until we have it," Ted said. "Then it seems essential." They walked back up Diagon Alley toward the Leaky Cauldron exit as the evening came in golden and warm, and Harry listened to the Tonks family argue with cheerful fluency about soup and trick cauldrons and whether Ted's collection of enchanted objects constituted a collection or an infestation, and Hedwig sat on his arm with her feathers settled and her amber eyes moving alertly around the world she had just entered, and the compass in Harry's chest pointed, as it always did, steadily and true. At the Leaky Cauldron entrance Andromeda paused and said, to Harry, quietly, while Ted and Tonks debated the soup question 5 paces ahead, that provision in the legal text. "I'm going to have it reviewed by Monday." "Good," Harry said. "If you're right about the wartime powers lapse, and I think you are, we may be able to file a challenge before Christmas." "Before Hogwarts," Harry said. "I want it filed before September. I want him to know something is moving." Andromeda looked at him for a moment. "You want him to hold on?" Harry held that thought. A man in Azkaban for 9 years without a trial, without a fair hearing, without the basic structure of justice that the world owed every person regardless of what they'd done. Holding on because holding on was all that was left. "Yes," Harry said. "I want him to hold on." Andromeda nodded once, with the finality of a decision made. Then she walked through to the Muggle Street and the London evening opened up around them, ordinary and unheroic, full of buses and pigeons and the smell of summer in the city. Harry stepped through the brickwork and into the world and felt the wand at his side and the compass pointing true and September coming like a tide, and ahead of him Tonks was making her dad laugh at something, and her hair was the unnamed color it went when she was happy, and the evening was wide open and full of everything that was going to happen. He walked into it without slowing down. Chapter 4. The Sorting doesn't know what to do with him. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at exactly 11 o'clock on the 1st of September, and Harry was on it before 10:30. Not because he was anxious. Because Andromeda had drilled the logistics with the thoroughness of a military planner and Harry had absorbed the information and acted on it, and also because the platform itself, the barrier between 9 and 10, the slide from the Muggle world into the Wizarding one, had produced in him something that he recognized as close to excitement and that he'd wanted a moment with before the crowds arrived. He stood on platform 9 3/4 alone for approximately 4 minutes, just looking. The Scarlet engine breathed steam into the September morning. The platform smelled like coal and magic and the particular nervous energy of beginnings. A few older students moved past him with the weary ease of people returning to a familiar place. A first-year family arrived at the far end of the platform and the mother started crying immediately, which her son appeared to find mortifying. Harry watched all of this with the owl cage balanced on his trolley and his trunk packed with geometric precision and a calm that was not the absence of feeling but the management of it. Then the Weasley family arrived and the platform became significantly louder. There were a lot of them. Harry counted automatically, 2 parents, 5 boys of varying heights, and a girl somewhere in the middle who was being carried by the situation rather than directing it. They occupied twice their physical footprint in noise and color and motion, and the father was already examining a ticket barrier with the specific interest of a man who was not seeing it for the first time but had not gotten less fascinated. One of the boys, roughly Harry's age with more freckles than most people ever accumulate, spotted him standing alone by the engine and made the quick, simple decision that this warranted investigation. He pushed his trolley over with the confidence of someone who does not consider whether an approach is welcome but also, Harry could see, without malice, just open, a little magnetic, running on good faith as a default setting. "You're Harry Potter," Ron Weasley said. "Yes," Harry said, and waited. Ron Weasley processed his own boldness briefly and then recovered. "I'm Ron. Ron Weasley." He paused, apparently running an internal check on whether this name would mean something. "There are a lot of us, Weasleys, I mean. You might have seen the general," he gestured at the family tableau behind him, "situation. Hard to miss," Harry said, and meant it without unkindness. Ron grinned. It was a very good grin, wide and straightforward and entirely without calculation. "Are you on your own? I've got a compartment with Fred and George but they're going to spend the whole journey turning things into other things and I might need somewhere to be where I'm not accidentally a ferret." Harry found himself smiling. "I have a compartment," he said. "You can share it." "Brilliant." Ron maneuvered his trolley alongside Harry's with the cheerful efficiency of a decision made and completed. "Is that a snowy owl?" "Hedwig," Harry said. "She's gorgeous." Ron looked at the cage with genuine appreciation. "We've got a family owl but she's ancient. Lost 2 tail feathers and she lists a bit in strong winds." "Hedwig's navigational sense is excellent," Harry said. "I've been using her for letters since August." Ron looked at him sideways with the perceptive curiosity of someone who has grown up in a large family and knows how to read what's in the gaps. "Where were you before August?" "Elsewhere," Harry said. "It's a long story." "Right," Ron said, accepting this in the easy way that people with good instincts accept the doors that are not yet open. "We can do the long version later." "Short version, Hogwarts, first year, what house do you think you'll get?" "Gryffindor," Harry said. Ron looked gratified. "Good. Same. My whole family's Gryffindor, going back about 6 generations, so if I don't get it there'll be a fairly significant family conversation." He paused. "My mum would say she'd be fine with anything." "She wouldn't be fine." Harry looked at the Weasley mother, who was now hugging the tallest boy with the intensity of someone who has accepted intellectually that her children are going to leave but has not emotionally reconciled with this fact. "You'll get Gryffindor," Harry said. "How do you know?" "You walked across a strange platform to talk to someone you didn't know based purely on goodwill and curiosity," Harry said. "That's Gryffindor." Ron thought about this and appeared to find it satisfying. The train filled. They found their compartment and Ron unpacked a truly impressive quantity of sandwiches from a bag his mother had pressed on him with the intensity of someone provisioning an expedition, and they ate and talked with the easy rhythm of two people discovering they are going to get along without needing to work at it. Harry liked Ron Weasley with the uncomplicated certainty he brought to most assessments. The boy was direct and warm and funny and had no side to him at all, which Harry had learned to value highly because people without side were rare. They were an hour outside London when the compartment door opened and a girl with large front teeth and very bushy brown hair looked in and said, in a slightly breathless way that suggested she'd been walking the train at some systematic pace, "Has anyone seen a toad?" Neville Longbottom's lost his. Harry and Ron both looked at her. Harry said, "No toad, sorry. You might try the luggage racks at the back of the train, they're warm." The girl blinked at the specificity of this suggestion. "Why the luggage racks?" "Toads like warmth and height, and the luggage racks at the back are near the engine coupling which runs warm in older trains." He paused. "It's a reasonable hiding place if you're a toad." The girl processed this with the expression of someone encountering a peer who has read a relevant book they haven't read. Yes, all right. I'll check." She lingered. "I'm Hermione Granger." "I've read all the course books already, have you?" "Most of them," Harry said. "Some extras." Hermione Granger looked at him with the particular brightness of someone who has found something interesting. "What extras?" "I tried to find supplementary materials but the Muggle library wasn't much help and I didn't know anyone to ask before I got my books in Diagon Alley." "Sit down," Harry said. "Ron, move the sandwiches." He looked at Hermione. "I'll give you a list when we get to Hogwarts. Some of them are hard to find in Diagon Alley, you have to know the side shops." Hermione sat. Ron moved the sandwiches with the philosophical acceptance of someone who has decided the compartment is going to be educational and has resigned himself. The toad was, in fact, in the rear luggage rack. Hogsmeade Station arrived in the blue dusk of early September, and Hagrid, enormous and warm and obviously fighting strong emotion at the sight of Harry, which Harry registered and treated with the careful gentleness he applied to large feelings that didn't belong to him, collected the first years from the platform with a voice that could have been heard from a significant distance in either direction. "Furs years. Furs years over here." The boats on the Black Lake crossed in the dark with Hogwarts rising ahead of them, lit from within, ancient and enormous and entirely, absolutely real. Harry sat in a boat with Ron and Hermione and a boy called Neville who was clutching his toad with the compressed relief of someone recent reunion, and he looked at the castle growing out of the dark water and the dark sky and felt something in his chest expand. Not the compass. Something older than the compass. Something that had been waiting. "It's bigger than the pictures," Ron said. "The pictures can't get the scale right," Hermione said. "The actual dimensions of the building according to Hogwarts, a history are, well, they're disputed, actually, because the castle changes its own floor plan, which is architecturally extraordinary. It's brilliant is what it is," Ron said. Harry said nothing. He watched the castle and the castle watched back, and somewhere between the boats and the shore something in him settled into a decision that he hadn't known he was making until it was made. "This is where the story moves," he thought. "Whatever comes next, it's here." He didn't know yet what came next. He had some ideas. He had 3 years of books and Andromeda's careful, informative conversations and Tonks's letters with their intelligence about the wizarding world's fault lines, and he had his own observations, and he had the mark on his forehead that was warm sometimes in a way he didn't like, and he had, somewhere above, a man called Quirinus Quirrell who smelled of garlic and fear and something darker that Harry had noticed at the start of term feast and filed under investigate. The boats crunched on the shore and Hagrid led them up the steps and Professor McGonagall met them in the entrance hall and the sorting began. The Great Hall was everything it should have been, for long tables, the enchanted ceiling showing September stars, the candles floating at intervals that seemed impossible until you stopped thinking about it. The staff table at the front had a gap in it, Harry noticed, right of center, that suggested someone was absent or late. He looked at the staff faces, catalogued them quickly, and found Quirrell at the end with his ridiculous turban and his eyes that did not stay still. McGonagall produced the sorting hat. It was old and patched and sat on a stool at the front of the hall, and when it opened the brim that was its mouth it sang a song about the houses and the founders with more personality than Harry had expected a hat to have. The hall applauded. Then the names began. Lavender Brown, Gryffindor, barely had the hat on before it called it. Susan Bones, Hufflepuff, quick and certain. Millicent Bulstrode, Slytherin, long enough to be a consideration. The names moved through the alphabet with occasional pauses and occasional near-instantaneous decisions and Harry listened and observed and built a map of people. Granger, Hermione. Hermione sat on the stool with her back straight and her expression composed and the hat took about 45 seconds and called Gryffindor, and Hermione walked to the table with the quiet dignity of someone choosing not to look too pleased. Several more names. Neville Longbottom, who knocked the stool sideways getting up and caught it, went to Gryffindor after a pause that looked agonizing from the outside. Draco Malfoy barely touched the stool. Potter, Harry. The hall went quiet. Not the quiet between sortings, something else. A full-stop quiet. Heads turning, whispers starting and stopping, the weight of a name that everyone in the room had learned before they were old enough to read. Harry walked to the stool and sat down and settled the hat on his head and said nothing, because he'd read that the hat could hear you and he was saving what he wanted to say. Well, said the hat, and its voice inside his head was old and unhurried and not unpleasant. You're an interesting one. Thank you, Harry thought. Not a compliment, exactly. A statement. There's a lot here. Your mother's magic, extraordinary woman, extraordinary sacrifice, it's woven through you like a second bloodstream. A pause. And something else. An anchor. I haven't seen that in a very long time. No, Harry agreed. Apparently not. The bond is mutual. Your magic has been developing along an accelerated path because of it. The hat seemed to be turning him over, examining different facets. Considerable intelligence. Excellent instinct for people. Courage that isn't loud but is absolutely non-negotiable. A pause. Ambition. Is that a problem? Not inherently. There's ambition in every house. The difference is what it's for. The hat considered. You could be great in Slytherin, you have the self-possession, the strategic mind, no, Harry thought, not rude, not heated, just clear. You're certain. Yes. Ravenclaw would suit the book collection. Ravenclaw would be comfortable, Harry thought. I'm not here to be comfortable. A pause. Harry could feel the hall waiting. It had been over a minute. Hufflepuff values loyalty, the hat offered, slightly differently, testing now rather than suggesting. I'm loyal to specific people for specific reasons, Harry thought. That's not the same as the Hufflepuff thing. They're loyal to the abstract concept of people. I'm loyal to the actual ones. The hat made a sound that was, inside Harry's head, unmistakably a laugh. And Gryffindor? Harry thought about a park in Magnolia Crescent. He thought about walking out of number 4 with a schoolbag and not looking back. He thought about telling Dumbledore, in the middle of Diagon Alley, that he wouldn't be managed. He thought about a legal text and a monthly transfer to a frozen vault and a man holding on in Azkaban because something was moving. I lead with my chest, he thought. I was told that about myself recently. I think it's accurate. The hat was quiet for a moment. Yes, it said. I rather think it is. Gryffindor, it called, and the table in red and gold erupted. Harry gave the hat back to McGonagall and walked to the Gryffindor table and sat down next to Ron, who was already halfway through a celebratory bread roll, and across from Hermione, who looked relieved in a way that told Harry she'd been quietly hoping and not admitting it. 7 minutes, said one of the twins, Fred, or George. Harry hadn't worked out the tells yet, from further down the table. New record. Was it 7? Said the other. I had it at 6.5. The pauses between thoughts count, said the first. 6.5 was the silence at the Ravenclaw moment. Noted, Harry said. How do I tell you apart? Both twins looked at him with identical delight. You can't, said Fred. Most people can't, said George. I will, Harry said, not as a boast, just as a statement of intent, and looked between them with the focused attention he brought to patterns. Fred had a slightly smaller scar above his left eyebrow and a tendency to start the sentences that George finished. George had a fraction of a second's delay before he smiled, as though he was checking the joke internally first. You're already doing it, Fred said. Eyebrow scar, Harry said, and you hesitate before you smile. He nodded at George. The twins looked at each other with the specific expression of people encountering a rearrangement of their default operational assumption. We're going to like having you in Gryffindor, they said, in the exact unison that Harry would come to understand was their natural state when surprised. Ron looked smug about his compartment decision. The castle in September had its own magic independent of anything taught inside it, the shift from summer to early autumn, the particular quality of stone-filtered light in the mornings, the staircases that moved and the portraits that watched, and the general sense that the building itself was alive and paying attention in a low, continuous way. Harry navigated it with the focused observation he brought to new environments, and within 3 days had a working map in his head of every route he'd identified. Not written down, he had a very good memory and written maps could be found. Within a week he knew all the short routes, several hidden passages, and the precise locations of 2 doors that weren't on any official map he'd seen. He also knew Quirrell was more wrong than he'd initially assessed. It wasn't the defense classes themselves, those were pitched well below what Harry had been reading for the past 3 years, which was educational in a different way than Quirrell intended because it showed Harry exactly where the floor of the curriculum was. It was the quality of wrongness in the classroom. Quirrell's magic had a smell to it, literally, beneath the garlic, something dark and sourly sweet, like something pressed between stone for a long time. And there were moments in class when Quirrell would ask a question and pause and his eyes would go somewhere else briefly, as though listening to something at a frequency the class couldn't hear. Harry noted all of this and said nothing. He answered questions when called on, performed the practical work at the level the class expected and not significantly above it, which was the only concession he made to any kind of concealment, not hiding his ability, just not demonstrating how far it extended before he understood the landscape better. Ron sat beside him in most classes and had developed the learning shorthand of someone who is practically adept but theoretically impatient, which meant he absorbed the theory fastest when Harry explained it conversationally. Hermione sat on Harry's other side and absorbed theory excellently but had a tendency to perform her understanding rather than use it, which Harry had mentioned once, carefully, and she'd gone very still and then very thoughtful and been noticeably more restrained in her hand-raising since, though the quality of her answers had improved because she was no longer rushing. He got a letter from Tonks on the 3rd day of term. It was in the pages of his Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook when he opened it before class, which was Tonks's preferred delivery method for Hogwarts letters because it was subtle and, she said, satisfying. The letter smelled faintly of the Tonks house, which was a complicated mixture of Ted's Enchanted Objects workshop and Andromeda's library and the general warm specific smell of a house where people lived loudly. Harry, Mum filed the challenge this morning. The solicitor, the new one, Mum didn't trust the old one after your comment about where he stopped reading, says the wartime powers argument is strong and the ministry is going to have to respond because it's been entered into the public record and they can't quietly disappear it. She also spoke to Dumbledore. She didn't tell me everything they said, but she came out of it looking like someone who had just had a very long argument and won on points even if she didn't get everything she wanted. She says he's agreed that your living arrangements will not return to what they were. How is Hogwarts? Is it everything you expected? I need detail. I've been to the Hogsmeade village once but never inside the castle. Also, what are your teachers like? I want to know about all of them, but specifically I want to know about Quirrell because Dad heard something at work. Dad started working for the Ministry in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office. I think I forgot to tell you about unusual magical activity at Hogwarts in the past year, and the name that came up in connection was Quirrell's. The compass is very strong today. Everything all right? TPS Mum says your owl is beautiful. I told her Hedwig doesn't like me. Mum said give her time. You both said the same thing and it's not reassuring because it implies a timeline. Harry read the letter twice, then tucked it inside the book and considered. Tonks's information about Quirrell arrived on top of his own observations and the combination had a weight to it. He wrote back that evening in the dormitory, while Ron and Neville and the other boys were doing the social cartography of new cohabitation, establishing pecking orders and comfort zones with the semi-organized chaos of young males. Good news on the challenge. Tell your mum well done on Dumbledore. Hogwarts, it's right. You'll know what I mean by that when you come. The castle is alive in the way the books described, but the books got the quality of it wrong. It's not eerie, it's just very old and paying attention. I like it. Teachers, McGonagall is exactly what she presents as, which is rare and admirable. Flitwick is brilliant, he knows something interesting about almost every spell he teaches and tells you if you ask. Sprout seems warm. Snape is a study. I think he was in love with my mother and I think it makes him complicated around me. He tried twice in potions to wrong-foot me and I answered correctly both times, and now he's moved to ignoring me, which is an improvement. Quirrell. You're right to ask. There's something in his classroom that I don't like, not him, exactly, but something present in the room. Something old and dark. He listens to things I can't hear and his magic has a different quality underneath the surface. He paused. Tell your dad to look for records of where Quirrell traveled in the year before he got the defense post. I think that's relevant. The compass is strong here. I think it's the castle, the ambient magic amplifies things. HPS. Give Hedwig 2 weeks. She's warming up faster than I expected. He gave Hedwig the letter. She looked at him with amber eyes, then very deliberately looked at where his quill was pointing, north-northwest, and back at him with the expression of an owl that has made its own assessments. I know, Harry said. 2 weeks for you, she might take longer. Hedwig made a sound of profound commentary and took the letter out the window. The first potions class had been instructive. Snape had a certain theatrical quality to his teaching, the flowing robes, the slow build of his entrance, the practiced timing of his impact. He was genuinely brilliant, Harry could see that, and genuinely contemptuous of poor preparation, and the combination made his classes function very well for the students who could keep up and very poorly for those who couldn't. Harry had spent 3 years reading potions theory in Andromeda's books. He did not struggle to keep up. Potter, Snape had said, in that first class, with the particular inflection that contained both the reputation and the implicit challenge to it. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Draught of living death, Harry said. One of the most powerful sleeping potions known. Asphodel is a member of the lily family, which is a fact that I imagine is not lost on you. The class went very still. Snape looked at him. Something moved behind those black eyes, complex, brief, suppressed. Where would you look, Snape said, recovering with the smoothness of long practice, if I told you to find me a bezoar? Stomach of a goat, Harry said. It's a universal antidote for most poisons. I'd have one in every potions kit as a general principle. And what, Snape said, very quietly, is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Nothing. They're the same plant. Also called aconite. It's one of the most toxic plants known to both Muggle and wizarding medicine, which is not a distinction that comes up often. Harry paused. I'm not trying to show off. These are reasonable preparation questions for a first potions class and I prepared for them. Another silence. Snape's expression had moved through several stages and arrived at something that was not warmth but was, Harry thought, the narrowest possible form of respect, the kind that resents itself. 5 points to Gryffindor, Snape said, making it sound expensive, and moved on. Ron whispered, you just made Snape give Gryffindor points. He's fair when he can't be otherwise, Harry said, quietly. He's not evil. He's just in pain and taking it out badly. Ron stared at him. It's been 10 minutes. I had context, Harry said. Letters. Ron looked like he was reconsidering the scope of what Harry's letters had covered. Which was accurate. 3 weeks into term, Harry went to see Dumbledore. He'd said first week, and the first week had been correctly prioritized toward navigation and people and the shape of the daily world. He'd spent the second week with Quirrell's classroom and the third with confirming his suspicions through the patterns in Quirrell's behavior, the absences, the specific day of the week that the classroom had the strongest wrong feeling, the way the third-floor corridor smelled on the mornings after Quirrell had presumably been near it. He knocked on the gargoyle at the entrance to the headmaster's office, said sherbet lemon with the mild contempt it deserved as a password, and climbed the stairs. Dumbledore was at his desk, looking as though he'd been expecting this visit since September 1st and had been running various scenarios about how it would go. His office was full of instruments Harry didn't recognize and several portraits of former headmasters who were variably asleep and awake and all paying attention. Harry, Dumbledore said. Sit down. Harry sat. I owe you an explanation, Dumbledore said, and possibly more than one apology. You can do both, Harry said. But first I want to tell you what I've noticed and you can tell me if I'm wrong. Dumbledore settled back slightly. Go ahead. Professor Quirrell has something in his classroom and possibly his office that shouldn't be there, Harry said. Something dark. Something that's been there since before term started and is getting stronger, not weaker. He paused. The third-floor corridor is involved. I haven't been there but I can smell the magic from the stairs. Dumbledore's expression shifted into something more careful. I see you have been observant. What's on the third floor, Professor? Something that is being protected, Dumbledore said, choosing his words in the way he always chose them, with precision designed to reveal some things and occlude others. Something that certain people are very interested in obtaining. And Quirrell is one of those people. Professor Quirrell is, Dumbledore stopped. He looked at Harry and in his eyes, Harry could see the calculation and the genuine thing fighting each other. What is it about Professor Quirrell that concerns you, specifically? His magic has a second layer, Harry said. Something underneath his. Something that uses his body and his voice but isn't him. He kept his voice level, factual. I think someone is with him. Not beside him. Inside him. The silence in Dumbledore's office was the particular silence of a room full of old magic holding itself very still. You can perceive that, Dumbledore said slowly. I can feel something wrong in a room, Harry said. I've been able to do it for a while. Is it Voldemort? The portraits flinched. One of them fell off its hook and had to be caught by a neighboring portrait. Dumbledore looked at Harry with those eyes that were tired and warm and complicated. What makes you ask that specifically? He's the only person whose incomplete presence makes sense in this context. He lost his body 10 years ago. He needs a host. He needs something on the third floor badly enough to risk being at Hogwarts in the body of a teacher. Harry paused. And my scar gets warm sometimes when I'm near Quirrell's classroom. Another silence. Yes, Dumbledore said. It is Voldemort. What's on the third floor? The Philosopher's Stone. Nicholas Flamel's stone. He watched Harry absorb this. It produces the elixir of life. It would give Voldemort the means to restore a permanent body. Harry sat with that for a moment. Not panicking, not alarmed, processing. The chess pieces moving in his head, settling into new positions. The protections between him and it, Harry said. Are they sufficient? They are intended to be challenging for anyone not known to the protectors, Dumbledore said. But not impossible. For Voldemort? Nothing is impossible. Dumbledore paused. The final protection is the stone itself. It can only be retrieved by someone who wants it but does not wish to use it. Harry thought about this. That's elegant, he said. Whose design? Mine, Dumbledore said, and there was something in his expression that was briefly, purely professional pride. It'll work, Harry said. But it's only the final protection. He gets through the others first. He paused. I want to know what the others are. Not to go through them, to understand the shape of what he's working around. Harry, I'm not going to run at Voldemort, Professor, Harry said. I'm 11 and I'm not reckless. But I am going to be prepared, and preparation requires information, and you have information I need. He held Dumbledore's gaze steadily. You decided 10 years ago that I didn't need information. That worked out as well as the cupboard did. The portraits were watching with undisguised interest. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Then he reached for a piece of parchment and began, carefully, to outline the protections. Harry listened and did not take notes because he didn't need to, and asked 3 questions that made Dumbledore pause twice and revise his answer once, and left the office with a complete picture and the particular quality of settled certainty that came from having the map. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and found Ron and Hermione in the common room, Hermione at a table with 3 books open simultaneously and Ron at the fire doing something with a chess set that involved a great deal of muttering. How was Dumbledore? Ron asked, without looking up. Harry had mentioned the meeting at breakfast. Ron had absorbed this with the adaptable equanimity that was his defining quality. Hermione had asked 4 questions. Informative, Harry said. He sat down in the chair across from Ron. What do you know about the 3rd-floor corridor? Ron's chess piece fell over. Hermione's head came up. Harry looked at them both. I'm going to tell you something. I need your judgment on it, not your panic. I don't panic, Hermione said. You do, Harry said, not unkindly, but you panic efficiently and then you become useful, which is fine. He looked at Ron. I occasionally panic, Ron said, but I'm very good at chess and I feel like that's relevant somehow. Harry almost smiled. It might be, actually. He settled back in the chair. Let me tell you about Voldemort and a Philosopher's Stone. The letter from Tonks arrived on a Thursday, delivered in the usual way, inside the book he'd picked up from the library that morning, and contained information that Harry had been expecting but had hoped to have longer before it arrived. Harry, Dad found what you asked about. Quirrell traveled to Albania last year. He was gone for 9 months and came back wrong. Dad's contact in the Magical Travel Registration Office says he came back wrong, quieter, scared of things. He requested a specific post at Hogwarts on his return. Defense against the dark arts. I don't like how all of this fits together. What are you going to do? Also, and I want you to understand I'm asking this as a genuine question and not a criticism, are you being careful? Not safe, I know you're not going to be safe, this is Hogwarts with Voldemort in the building, but careful? Those are different things. The compass has been very strong for 3 days. Something's happening near you. TPS Hedwig is clearly warming up to me based on nothing except hope but I'm choosing optimism. Harry read it in the library, at the back table that no one else used because the shelf beside it contained a book on flobberworm cultivation that smelled unfortunate. He wrote back on the verso of his charms notes, Albania makes sense. He went looking for Voldemort and found him. Careful, yes. Safe, as you said, no. But the difference between me running at a problem and me walking toward it with full information is significant, and I'm doing the second thing. Dumbledore knows I know. We've reached an arrangement. He tells me what I need to know. I don't do anything without consulting him, except in emergencies, and I define emergencies as situations where waiting means the stone moves from being protected to being in Voldemort's hands. The compass being strong is the castle's ambient magic. I think it amplifies the bond. It's not dangerous, it's actually, he paused. Looked at what he'd been about to write. Then wrote it anyway. It's actually a comfort. Knowing you're there. I think about it sometimes when the castle is very dark and very quiet at night and the mark on my head gets warm in the direction of the 3rd floor. The compass says you're there. It's enough. Give Hedwig a treat when she arrives. She's partial to the biscuits your mum makes. He folded the letter and gave it to Hedwig, who was perched on the library shelf with the complete impunity of an owl that had decided library rules applied to owls differently than to people. To Tonks, Harry told her. Hedwig looked at him. Then she looked at the letter. Then she looked at him again with the expression of an owl working through a private consideration. Then she took the letter and left without any particular drama. Harry watched her go and then opened his charms notes and returned to work, and outside the library windows the Hogwarts night was wide and dark and the mark on his forehead was quiet and the compass pointed true and the story moved forward in the dark, steady as a tide coming in. Chapter 5, What Anchors and What Drowns. October arrived with the specific aggression of a Scottish autumn, rain in sheets, wind that found every gap in every window, and a general atmospheric quality that the castle seemed to enjoy rather than suffer. The corridors smelled like wet stone and candle smoke and the particular warmth of a building that had been inhabited continuously for a very long time. Harry had started running in the mornings. Not for exercise, exactly, though that was a benefit. The castle was different before anyone else was up, the portraits still asleep, the staircases lazy and unmoved, the quality of the stone at 6 in the morning something between cathedral and something older than cathedrals. He ran the circuits he'd mapped in September, and he thought, and his magic moved with him in the easy companionable way it had developed since the wand, slightly louder than wandless but more precise, like the difference between speaking and whispering. He was on the 4th floor on a Tuesday morning in early October when the compass lurched. Not the steady directional pull he was used to, this was a jerk, sudden and strong, like a rope pulled taut. He stopped running and pressed his hand to his sternum and the direction was right, north-northwest, the same as always, but the quality was wrong. Urgent. He stood in the dark stone corridor and felt it for 3 seconds. Then he went back to the dormitory and found Hedwig on the bedpost with a letter that was still slightly warm from flight speed, which meant she'd been pushed. The letter was short. Harry, don't panic. Mum's been taken in for questioning by the ministry. Something to do with the serious black challenge, they're calling it interference with a closed conviction. She's fine, she went voluntarily, she's got the solicitor. But it happened this morning and I felt the compass go strange and I needed you to know. They're trying to make the challenge go away. They can't make it go away because it's in the public record, but they can make it difficult. Dad is furious. The kind of furious where he's very quiet. Tell me you felt it. Harry read it twice. His magic was running at a higher register than usual, the way it did when it was responding to something, not dangerous, not directed, just alert. He breathed through it deliberately and wrote back immediately, I felt it. I'm fine. Are you fine? They can't make it go away. You're right, the public record provision is what your mum's solicitor used specifically because it's irreversible. What they can do is delay and intimidate, and neither of those is permanent. He paused, then wrote, tell your dad that quiet furious is useful furious. Loud furious makes mistakes. What ministry department? Who's running the questioning? Her reply came 2 hours later, in the Transfiguration textbook he'd left on his desk, Department of Magical Law Enforcement. A man called Fudge came, apparently. The minister himself. Which means someone very senior is very worried about this challenge. Mum says that's a good sign even if it doesn't feel like one right now. She's back home. They couldn't actually hold her because she hasn't broken any law, she filed a legal challenge through correct channels. They just wanted to look at her for a while and say things that were meant to be frightening. Mum says she's been looked at by the Black family. Cornelius Fudge doesn't know what frightening is. Are you all right? The compass steadied when I wrote back. I think it responds to communication. Harry smiled slightly at that last observation, which was accurate. He'd noticed it too, the way the bond eased when the letters were recent, as though the communication itself was a kind of presence. Tell your mum she's brilliant, he wrote. And yes. We're all right. He put the letter in the inside pocket of his robes and went to Transfiguration. McGonagall's classroom was on the 3rd floor, adjacent to a corridor Harry had been monitoring since his first week with the patient, continuous attention of a very still pond. It wasn't the restricted corridor, that was further along, but the quality of the air changed as you approached it, the ambient magic of the castle giving way to something more pressured. He'd said nothing about this to Ron and Hermione since the night in the common room when he'd given them the initial picture. He'd said, there's a situation, here are the facts, do with them what you will. What they'd done with them was, characteristically, different from each other and both useful. Ron had asked practical questions. How many protections? What order? What were the weaknesses? He'd approached it like chess, not emotionally, not dramatically, just structurally, which Harry found genuinely valuable because Ron's chess mind saw geometric things that Harry's more instinctive approach could miss. Hermione had gone to the library. She'd come back 3 days later with a stack of books and the expression of someone who has found something and needs to determine whether to be pleased or alarmed about it. Nicholas Flamel, she said, sitting down across from Harry at the back of the common room. I found him. She pushed a book toward him, A History of Alchemical Achievement, open to a page that noted Flamel and his wife Perenelle with the specific tone reserved for people who have been so remarkable that history has to remind itself they existed. He's real. Your philosopher's stone is real. I know, Harry said. Dumbledore told me. Hermione's expression went through several stages. Dumbledore told you. Yes. When you went to see him. Yes. She looked at Ron. He does this, Ron said. He already has information and then he tells you he has it later, after you've found it yourself. It's slightly annoying but the end result is you've both verified it from different sources. Hermione looked back at Harry. Did you plan for me to go to the library? I planned for you to do what you do when you're given an incomplete picture, Harry said. Which is go find the rest of it. That's not manipulation, it's just knowing who you are. Another set of expressions. Then Hermione straightened her back and said, that's either the most flattering or most frustrating thing anyone said to me. Both, Ron suggested. Both, Harry agreed. Fine, Hermione said, and pulled the book back and turned to a different page. Flamel and Dumbledore have been working together since the 1990s, since before you started at Hogwarts. The stone being kept here is not a coincidence and not just security. I think Dumbledore brought it here specifically to draw Voldemort out. She looked up. He's using it as bait. Harry had reached this conclusion 2 weeks ago. He said, yes. Which means, Hermione continued, and her voice had the particular quality of someone who has followed a logical chain to a conclusion they find objectionable, that in a sense, we, are part of that plan. Voldemort is drawn to the stone. The stone is at Hogwarts. You are at Hogwarts. She closed the book. Dumbledore wants to resolve the Voldemort problem, and the best chance of resolution is when there's something Voldemort wants badly enough to take a significant risk for. And I'm here, Harry said. Yes. And you're fine with that? Ron asked. Harry thought about it honestly. The man in the brown coat, the woman at the bus stop, 10 years of being observed and managed and positioned without his input. And here, at Hogwarts, for the first time, a version of that management that had been made explicit, offered as information, consented to rather than imposed. "I'm fine with the goal," Harry said. "I'm not entirely fine with being moved around like a chess piece. But Dumbledore and I have an arrangement now." He paused. "If I'm going to be in this, I'm going to be in it with full information and my own judgment. That's the difference." Ron nodded slowly. "So what do we do?" "We watch," Harry said. "We learn. We're prepared." He looked at them both, Ron's uncomplicated good faith, Hermione's incisive engine of a mind. "If something moves, we move with it. But we're not running at anything." "Good," Hermione said firmly. "Because I have exams." Halloween arrived with the traditional Hogwarts enthusiasm, the great hall decorated with hundreds of floating pumpkins, the feast enormous and orange-lit, and Harry was sitting at the Gryffindor table eating his way through something pumpkin-adjacent and listening to the Weasley twins staging an increasingly elaborate argument about the structural engineering of pumpkin carving, when Professor Quirrell crashed through the doors. Harry was watching him before he'd taken his second step into the hall. The man was pale and sweating, and there was something very wrong with the movement of him, not fear, not quite, but something more pressured than fear. He gripped the edge of the nearest table and his turban was slightly askew and his eyes were somewhere private and far away. "Troll," he gasped, and the word had a quality to it that Harry noted, slightly rehearsed. Not a spontaneous gasp but a placed one. "In the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." And then he fainted. Harry was on his feet, not dramatically, just standing, and scanning the hall with the rapid assessment of someone for whom this event had a context. Dumbledore stood immediately. "Prefects, lead your houses back to the dormitories." His voice was carrying and authoritative, and Harry could hear the specific alert quality in it, genuine alarm, but also thinking, already processing. Around Harry, the hall erupted into the controlled chaos of 400 students moving at once. Ron was already beside him, and Hermione. Harry turned to Ron. "Where's Hermione?" Ron's face changed. "She went to the girls' bathroom," he said. "The one on the second floor." He paused. "She was upset. Before the feast, Malfoy said something, or his friends did, and Harry was already moving." "Harry," Ron said, and fell into step beside him without needing the rest of it, which was one of the genuinely excellent things about Ron Weasley. He didn't ask why. He just came. They went against the flow of students moving upward, edging along the wall with the practiced invisibility of people who'd spent 2 months learning the castle's social geography, and Harry followed the second-floor corridor with the quick certainty of his mapped routes. The troll was there before they were. Harry heard it first, the specific, massive, rhythmic sound of something very large not quite fitting in the corridor it was in, a sound like a building trying to walk. He held up his hand and Ron stopped immediately behind him. "It's in the bathroom," Harry said quietly. "How do you know?" "It stopped moving and the door at the end is the only one big enough." "The door at the end is the girls' bathroom?" "Yes." Harry stood at the corner and thought very fast. He could hear, underneath the troll sounds, a muffled human voice, controlled, compressed, Hermione not screaming because screaming was not her default and Hermione in crisis was Hermione thinking as fast as she could under terrible conditions. "Wand out," Harry said to Ron. "Already," Ron said. Harry went around the corner. The troll was in the bathroom, he could see its back through the open door, the gray-green hide, the enormous club being dragged along the wall, taking chunks of stone with it. Inside, between the sinks, Hermione Granger had her wand drawn and was watching the ceiling rather than the troll, which was correct. The ceiling was lower, the troll couldn't fully swing the club vertically. "Smart," Harry said, mostly to himself. "Louder, Hermione. Don't move." Hermione's head turned slightly, found him in the doorway, and her face did something that was relief and fury and terror in one compound expression. "What are you doing here? You need to leave." "We'll leave together," Harry said. He looked at the troll's club. He looked at the ceiling. He looked at the width of the doorframe and the angle of the troll's legs, and he ran the geometry in about 2 seconds. The troll turned. It looked at Harry with eyes that were small and old and not very interested, which was the correct amount of interested to have in something you intended to hit. It raised the club. Harry pointed his wand at the troll's nostrils, because he'd read, in one of Andromeda's books, a general magical creature compendium that was not on any Hogwarts list, that mountain trolls had a nerve cluster in the nasal bridge that was disproportionately sensitive to light-based spells, and he said, clearly, Lumos Maxima, and directed the beam not as a broad light but as a focused point, directly into the troll's left nostril. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The troll's head went back. The club swung up rather than down. The troll made a sound like a very large person sitting on something that should not be sat upon, staggered left, and hit the wall with enough force to crack the tiles, and then sat down heavily among the ruins of 3 bathroom sinks. Harry crossed the bathroom in 4 strides, put himself between the troll and Hermione, and said, without turning around, "Are you hurt?" "No," Hermione said. Her voice was steady, which impressed him. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then walk. Toward the door. Ron's there." He heard her moving behind him. The troll was sitting in the ruins of the sinks, touching its nose with one enormous finger, looking confused and aggrieved. It was not going to stay sitting for long. "Harry," Ron said from the door, with the particular clipped quality of someone watching a troll recover its faculties. Harry backed toward the door, keeping his wand up and his eyes on the troll, and the troll looked at him with those small, incurious eyes, and Harry felt his magic running hot and ready underneath the wand, and he met the troll's gaze and let it see what was there, not aggression, not threat exactly, just the unambiguous message of something that was not going to move and was not the least bit afraid. The troll looked away first. Harry stepped through the bathroom door and Ron pulled it shut, and all 3 of them stood in the corridor and breathed. Then McGonagall arrived at a run, accompanied by Snape and Quirrell, and the corridor rearranged itself around the adult responses, McGonagall's rapid inventory of injury versus non-injury, Snape silent at the edge of the group with his eyes moving and calculating, Quirrell looking at the bathroom door with an expression that Harry watched from his peripheral vision and filed carefully. It was not surprise. It was not quite the expression of a man encountering an unexpected problem. It was closer to the expression of a man whose plan had needed to account for variables. Harry said nothing. McGonagall was stern and also, visibly, a fraction undone by relief. "You could have been killed. What were you thinking? Why weren't you in your dormitory?" Hermione was alone, Harry said, before Hermione could speak. He glanced at her briefly. "I'd heard she wasn't at the feast." Hermione looked at him. He gave her the small fractional nod that meant "I'll explain later." She was smart enough to take it. McGonagall collected herself. 10 points from Gryffindor, she said, and then paused, because she was looking at the bathroom door where the sounds of a confused troll were still audible and the wall beside it had a crack in it that was 6 feet long. "How exactly did you subdue it?" "Lumos Maxima directed at the nasal nerve cluster," Harry said. "The light causes a pain response intense enough to disorient without permanent damage. The troll is fine. Just confused." McGonagall looked at him. Then at the door. Then at him again. "And where," she said carefully, "did you learn about troll nasal nerve clusters?" "Compendium of Magical Creatures, 3rd edition," Harry said. "It's not on the first-year list, but it's in the library." A pause. 10 points from Gryffindor, McGonagall said again, but this time it sounded like she was reminding herself rather than sentencing him. "And 5 points each. For the presence of mind demonstrated." This last part came out slightly strangled, like a person offering a compliment in a situation where the compliment was in direct conflict with the lesson about following rules. Snape had not said anything. He was watching Harry with those black eyes and the expression Harry had come to read as I am revising my information. Harry looked at him for one moment, long enough to acknowledge that he was being watched, and then looked away. Quirrell was gone. Harry noted this without looking where he'd gone. Later, he thought. One thing at a time. In the common room that night, the three of them at the back table with the fire burning down and the rest of the house gradually dispersing to bed, Hermione said, "I know you told McGonagall it was for my sake. Was it also for other reasons?" Harry looked at her. "What other reasons?" "The troll was in the dungeons first," she said. "That's what Quirrell said. By the time we found it, it was on the second floor." She had a quill out and was making a small precise diagram without really looking at it, thinking through her hands. "Trolls don't walk upstairs for fun. They don't navigate. They go where something directs them or where they smell food." She looked up. "The bathroom doesn't smell like food." "No," Harry agreed. Ron looked between them. "Someone moved it. Someone directed it to a specific location," Hermione said. "The question is why the second-floor girls' bathroom?" She paused. "Unless the point wasn't the destination. The point was the distraction." She set the quill down. "Everyone in the castle goes back to their dormitories. Everyone is accounted for and occupied. The dungeons are empty and the teachers are all dealing with the troll." She met Harry's eyes. "Something on the third floor?" "Possibly," Harry said. "Do you know if anything was disturbed?" "Not yet." He'd been thinking about this since the bathroom corridor. Quirrell's expression at the door, not surprise. Not relief. The expression of a plan encountering unexpected variables. If Quirrell Voldemort had intended tonight as a run at the third floor, he'd needed everyone occupied. He'd also needed a reason to be out of the feast without suspicion. A troll panic served both purposes. Why didn't it work? Ron asked. If that was the plan, the troll as distraction, something stopped it. Us being in the corridor, Hermione said. He'd have had to come back through it. He couldn't, he'd have been seen. She paused. By us specifically. Harry thought about the timing of Tonks's morning letter, the lurch of the compass, the quality of the wrong feeling he'd had in the corridor before the feast. Something had shifted on Halloween and it had not been the troll. Quirrell tried something tonight and was stopped, Harry said. Not fully, I don't know if anything was taken. But stopped. He looked at them. I need to check with Dumbledore tomorrow. How? Ron said. You can't just walk in and, I already have once, Harry said. The gargoyle lets me through. I think Dumbledore gave it instructions. Of course he did, Hermione said, with the tone of someone filing this under things that seem surprising but actually aren't. Bed, Harry said. It's late and we're tired and tomorrow will be clearer. You're incredibly calm about all of this, Hermione said. I've had context, Harry said, which was the same answer he'd given Ron in potions and it was no less true now. 3 years of letters and legal texts and Andromeda Tonks explaining the shape of the world. You couldn't be surprised by what you'd already mapped. Good night, Ron said, with the philosophical finality of someone who has accepted the company he's keeping and is at peace with it. They went to bed. Harry lay in the dark and felt the compass pointing steadily and tapped the coin once, softly, the code they used for I'm fine, nothing urgent, just checking, and felt, 20 seconds later, the warmth of the return tap that meant I'm here, I've got you. The castle breathed around him, old and awake, and the mark on his forehead was very warm in a way that had nothing to do with the compass or Tonks and everything to do with what had moved tonight on the third floor. He slept anyway. He was good at sleeping in conditions that required nerve. November brought Quidditch. Harry had received his broom, a Nimbus 2000, the fastest production model available, 3 weeks into term via McGonagall, who had presented it with the crisp efficiency of someone doing a good deed and declining to be emotional about it. It had arrived with a note from Wood, the Gryffindor captain, that managed to be both welcoming and worrying in its comprehensive listing of what was expected from Gryffindor's new seeker. He'd been in the air once before Hogwarts, a borrowed school broom in the 4th week of term when Madam Hooch had the class up for the first time, and the sky had felt like the compass felt, like something settling into its correct position. The broom between his hands, the altitude, the particular quality of cold air at height. He'd pulled stunts that Madam Hooch had told him she shouldn't encourage and then quietly encouraged anyway, and Wood, watching from the ground with binoculars and an expression of a man receiving miraculous news, had gone straight to McGonagall. His first match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin, first Saturday in November, and the weather was clear and cold and exactly the kind of morning that wanted something significant to happen in it. Harry sent a letter to Tonks the night before, Quidditch tomorrow. First match. I wanted to tell you. She sent back, in a letter that arrived in his Transfiguration textbook before dinner, Harry, if you fall off that broom I will personally come to Hogwarts and be furious at you, and my furious is very difficult to ignore because my hair goes a color that doesn't exist in visible light. Win. TPS tell me everything after. He folded it and put it in his inside pocket, which was where he kept the letters he wanted close, and went to sleep. The match itself was the particular kind of event that is simultaneously everything and nothing, enormous in the moment, forgotten by the wider world within days, meaningful only to the people inside it. 300 feet above the Hogwarts grounds in the November air, with the Slytherin seeker Terence Higgs circling below and the crowd a thin roar in the cold, Harry felt his magic and his body and the broom synchronize into a single moving thing. The snitch appeared near the Slytherin goal posts in the 11th minute. Harry was already moving when it appeared, because he'd been watching the pattern of its flight from the moment the match started. The snitch moved in spirals, a fixed radius, and doubled back every 40 seconds, which wasn't random behavior but something more like a mathematical function, and he'd been tracking the function from altitude while also tracking the game below him with the divided attention that came naturally to people who'd spent years monitoring threats from peripheral vision. He angled the broom into a dive. Something hit him from the side. Not another player, not a bludger. A force, directional, targeting the broom rather than Harry specifically. The broom lurched, the nose went up involuntarily, and Harry gripped with his knees and felt the broom fighting him, not malfunctioning but being fought, controlled from outside, the handles yanking in increments as though someone had a hand on them from a distance. He didn't panic. He assessed. Directional jinx, aimed at the broom. Coming from the stands. He glanced down without releasing his grip, found the staff section, found Quirrell, found Snape. Snape was looking at the broom. Not at Harry. At the broom. His lips were moving. Harry filed this rapidly. Counter-jinx or causing? He had 1 second to decide and he decided based on Quirrell's expression. Quirrell, in the teacher's stand, was watching the broom with the same pressured focus he'd had outside the bathroom door on Halloween. Snape was counter-jinxing. The broom was Quirrell. He let his magic move into the broom handles. Not a counter-jinx, he didn't have the specific counter, he didn't know the original hex well enough. But he knew warmth and he knew the sensation of something finding its proper place, and he pushed that sensation through his palms into the wood of the broom and felt it respond. The handle settled, the nose leveled, the fighting stopped not because the jinx had ended but because the broom had found an anchor in him rather than the jinx. He pointed the nose down. The snitch was where he'd calculated it would be, back near the Slytherin goal posts, executing the double-back phase of its spiral. Higgs hadn't tracked it the same way. Higgs was 200 feet above it and looking in the wrong direction. Harry caught it 60 feet above the ground, pulling up hard at the last moment, and felt the golden wings beating against his palm. The roar from the Gryffindor stands was instantaneous and enormous. Harry landed, and the team descended on him, and Wood was somewhere in the middle of the group saying things that suggested the match had been absurdly fast, and Harry stood in the middle of it with the snitch still in his hand and thought, very quietly, Quirrell just tried to kill me in front of 300 people and failed and now he knows I know it was him. That changed the timeline. He went to Dumbledore that evening, before dinner, and told him about the broom and Quirrell's direction and Snape's counter. Dumbledore listened without interrupting, which Harry had come to recognize as his genuine attention mode as opposed to his waiting to redirect mode. "Severus was protecting you," Dumbledore said, when Harry had finished. "I know," Harry said. "I'd like you to tell him I know. Not as a thank you, as information. He should know I'm not operating blind." Dumbledore looked at him. "Severus is complicated in his relationship to you." "I'm aware," Harry said. "He loved my mother and I look like my father and the combination is difficult." He paused. "That's not my problem to solve. But his knowing I have useful information about what's happening in this castle is a practical matter." He looked at Dumbledore. "Quirrell is accelerating. Tonight was direct. If he tried once this openly, he'll try again before the end of term. The protections on the stone are sufficient for someone who doesn't have a host body with faculty access," Harry said. "Quirrell can get closer to the third floor than most. He knows the castle. He has a reason to be in any corridor." He paused. "What happens if he gets through all the protections except the last one? The mirror?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "He cannot retrieve the stone from the mirror unless he wants it without using it. So he can't get the stone directly," Harry said. "But what if he's not going alone? What if he takes someone with him, someone who genuinely wants the stone but without the intent to use it, and uses them to retrieve it?" Dumbledore's expression shifted. Harry could see he'd had this thought and had been sitting with it. "He can't control someone's intent through Voldemort's influence alone," Dumbledore said. "The mirror sees through that." "Then the mirror is sufficient," Harry said. "Yes. Then the risk is getting through the other protections, not the last one." Harry looked at his hands. "What's the first protection?" "A three-headed dog," Dumbledore said, and there was something in his expression that was almost wry. "Whose?" "Hagrid's. He's called Fluffy." Harry sat with this information. Hagrid named a three-headed dog Fluffy. "He has a gift for finding the extraordinary qualities in things others find merely terrifying," Dumbledore said. "How does it work?" "The protection?" "Music puts it to sleep," Dumbledore said. "A simple charm." Harry filed this with the particular internal sound of a piece completing a pattern. "Quirrell knows about music. He'd know the method." He stood. "I think you should reinforce the first protection. Not obviously, not in a way that tells Quirrell the others know he's working at it. But the first door is the easiest and he's already tried twice." Dumbledore looked at him with those complicated eyes. "You are," he said slowly, "a remarkable 11-year-old. "I've had good books," Harry said, for the third time, and left. The letter he wrote to Tonks that night was longer than usual. He told her about the match and the broom and Quirrell and the deduction about Snape's counterjinx and Dumbledore and the music. He told her about the pattern he was tracking, the accelerating quality of Quirrell's attempts, the sense that whatever Voldemort needed from the stone was becoming more urgent. He told her that he was not afraid of any of this in the way that the story expected him to be, which was a relevant piece of information about his own interior landscape that he was still mapping. He also told her about the snitch, still in his hand when he'd landed, the wings beating. The crowd. He wrote, "I don't know what I expected. My first Quidditch match. I expected it to feel like something external, like watching a thing happen to me. But it felt very internal. Like the broom and the sky and the catch were just me being what I am in the place that fits it. Does that make sense?" He sent it and she replied the next morning, "It makes absolute sense. That's what my shifting feels like when it works properly. Not performance. Not effort. Just, being the thing you already are. I've been thinking about what you said about Quirrell accelerating. Harry. When it comes, when the final thing comes, don't do it alone. Not because you can't. Because you shouldn't. The anchor isn't about needing me there. It's about the bond being a form of strength, and strength that goes unused is wasted strength. I've been working on something. Ask me about it at Christmas. Harry read this twice, with the particular attention he gave to Tonks's letters when they had something under the surface. She'd been working on something. He could feel the quality of it through the bond, focused, directed energy, the way she felt when she was practicing her shifting seriously and not casually. He wrote back, "I'll ask at Christmas. And Tonks, I know. Not alone." The reply came back, into the pages of his defense text, 3 words, "Good. Now study." He studied. December arrived, and with it the cold that made the castle breathe differently and the end of term approaching like a wall. Harry watched Quirrell, and Quirrell did not try anything openly since the broom, which was worse rather than better. The man was regrouping, reassessing, and the thing inside him had a patience that was different from Quirrell's own nervous energy. A patience like stone under water. Harry wrote to Andromeda about the serious challenge, and she wrote back that the ministry had filed a counter-response that was procedurally strong but legally thin, and the solicitor was confident. He wrote to Sirius directly, not knowing if the letters reached him, not knowing what the postal arrangements for Azkaban were, but sending anyway because information that might reach someone was better than silence. He wrote, "I'm Harry Potter. I know who you are. I'm working on getting you out. Hold on." He didn't know if it arrived. He sent it with Hedwig, who took the instruction with the gravity of an owl who understood some deliveries were more important than others, and he watched her go north and felt the compass do its steady, reliable thing, and thought about Sirius Black in a stone cell somewhere, 9 years of stone, and the warm weight of a legal challenge in the public record. On the last day of term, the last night before the express, he sat in the common room alone after everyone else had gone up, and held the coin and felt the bond point north-northwest, and thought about summer. Tonks would be at King's Cross. He didn't know this, she hadn't said, but he knew it the way he knew the troll's nasal nerve cluster and the snitch's spiral function and Quirrell's expression outside the bathroom. He just knew. The fire burned down and the castle breathed, and outside the snow came in soft against the windows. Something's coming, he thought, and the thought wasn't afraid, just alert. Before the end of the year. Before summer. Something's going to move. He tapped the coin twice, not the "I'm fine" signal, not the "I need you" signal, but the third one they'd established somewhere in 3 years of practice, the one that had no words attached to it. Just, "I'm here." "Are you?" The warmth came back immediately. No hesitation. "I'm here." He went to bed. Chapter 6, The Mirror Doesn't Lie. The castle was different at Christmas. Not quieter, emptier, which wasn't the same thing. Quieter implied the absence of sound. Empty meant the absence of a particular human warmth, the constant background radiation of 400 people moving and talking and existing in close proximity. When most of them went home for the holidays, what remained was something more elemental, the castle itself, vast and old and full of its own noise, wind in the towers, the creak of settling stone, the portraits shuffling between frames in the longer corridors as though using the holiday to visit. Harry stayed. He'd thought about going to the Tonks house, and Andromeda had offered it directly, in a letter 2 weeks before end of term, "You are welcome here at Christmas. This is not a courtesy offer, it's an actual one." He'd written back, "I know. Thank you. I need to stay at Hogwarts this year." She'd understood without requiring an explanation, which was one of Andromeda Tonks's most useful qualities. He wasn't staying because of the stone. He was staying because something was going to move and he wanted to be in position when it did, and position meant Hogwarts, meant proximity to the 3rd floor and to Quirrell and to the particular pressured wrongness that had been building since October like water behind a dam that was not going to hold through February. He also, unexpectedly, had a Christmas morning. He woke up to the specific weight of presents on the end of his bed, which he'd been told about theoretically, Ron had mentioned it, Hermione had confirmed it, but which still produced something in his chest that he recognized as surprise, clean and uncomplicated. He sat up in the dormitory, largely empty and cold, and went through them with the focused attention of someone who'd never had a pile of gifts and wasn't going to squander the experience. From the Weasley family, a jumper, deep green, hand-knitted by Molly Weasley with an H on the chest. Harry held it for a moment before putting it on. It was warm in the specific way that made things. From Ron, a box of Honeydukes chocolate and a note that said Happy Christmas. Have you eaten all of it before I get back, because that's what I'm going to do with mine. From Hermione, a book, of course, on advanced wandwork theory with a note that said I thought you'd find the chapter on wandless to wand transition interesting given your particular history, and Harry smiled because it was exactly right. From Andromeda, a small package containing a vial of something dark and warm-smelling with a label in her handwriting, strengthening solution, correctly brewed, drink it at the start of the new year. I have reasons for this timing that I will explain when you come home for summer, and beneath the vial, wrapped separately, a folded piece of parchment. He opened the parchment. Inside was a date. January 14th. Beneath it, the challenge has been accepted for hearing. Wizengamot session. I need you there. Harry read this twice, then pressed the parchment to his sternum and breathed. Beneath all of this, wrapped in brown paper with no note, the invisibility cloak. He unfolded it slowly, the fabric moving through his hands like cool water, like something that had no intention of being caught by anything as inconvenient as light. He'd read about invisibility cloaks, every wizard child had, but reading about them and holding one were different orders of knowledge. He turned it over in his hands, looking for identifying marks, found the Potter family crest worked into the hem in invisible stitching that caught in sideways light, and felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the compass. Your father's, was all the note said, on a small card that fluttered to the dormitory floor. The handwriting was Dumbledore's. He put the cloak on. He stood in the empty dormitory and watched his own hands disappear and felt, oddly, not invisible so much as just present, still entirely himself, still the compass and the magic and the mark on his forehead and everything else, just without the particular social weight of being seen. It was a useful distinction. He took the cloak off and put it carefully in his trunk and wrote a thank you to Dumbledore that acknowledged the gift and contained, at the end, 2 words that were not precisely what they seemed, I understand. Dumbledore would know what he understood. That the cloak was not just a gift. That it was information about trust. Tonks arrived at King's Cross on January 2nd. She was there when the Hogwarts Express pulled in for the return journey, standing on the platform with her hands in her coat pockets and her hair very pink and her eyes scanning the carriages before they'd fully stopped, and she found Harry before he'd stepped off the train. He saw her from the window first, a bright spot of color in the January grey of the London platform, still uncertain in the way she'd learned to be, the chaotic girl from the park long since become something more directed. He got off the train and she looked at him for 2 seconds without saying anything, which was her version of the kind of long look that other people expressed with more words. You're taller, she said. You are too, Harry said. Obviously. I can control that. She produced from her pocket, with no ceremony, a small wrapped package and held it out. Happy Christmas, 3 days late. He opened it. Inside was a small brass compass, actual Muggle compass, physical needle, magnetic north, with an inscription on the back, for when the other one is enough but this one is more useful. He turned it over and the needle swung north. He felt, against his sternum, the bond shift slightly, warm and amused. That's a joke, she said, watching his face. It's a good one. He pocketed it. How's Andromeda? Preparing, Tonks said. The hearing's in 11 days. She's been in the study every morning since the date was confirmed. She fell into step beside him as they moved down the platform. Are you ready for it? What's my role? She wants you there as Harry Potter, Tonks said carefully. Not to testify, you have no direct evidence. But the Wizengamot has certain, she called it symbolic weight. The existence of a challenge supported by the person Sirius Black was supposed to have betrayed changes the narrative. She paused. It makes it harder to quietly dismiss. Harry thought about a man in Azkaban for 9 years without a trial, and the particular expression Andromeda had worn looking into his cupboard, and what it meant to have standing in a room and use it. "I'll be there," he said. Tonks looked at him from the side. "You know they're going to look at you. The whole Wizengamot. They're going to look at the scar." "They can look," Harry said. The corner of her mouth moved. "Okay." They walked through the barrier at platform 9 3/4 into the Muggle concourse, and Ted Tonks was outside with the car, and he got out when he saw them and clapped Harry on the shoulder with the warm, unceremonious physical ease that Harry had decided, somewhere in November, was one of his favorite things about Ted Tonks. "Good to see you, Harry. The car's warm." He looked at his daughter. "What color is that today?" "Pink," Tonks said. "It looks slightly more coral than last week." "It's still pink, Dad." "I'm just saying, there are nuances." "Get in the car, Dad." The Wizengamot chamber was underground, which Harry had not expected. He'd expected high ceilings, broad windows, the imposing horizontal space of authority. What he got was a room carved from stone 60 feet below the Ministry of Magic's lobby, circular and tiered, with benches curving up the walls and the particular atmosphere of a place where consequences had been pronounced for centuries. The air had weight. The stone was dark and everything in it was designed to make the person at the center feel small. Harry stood at the center, beside Andromeda, and looked around at the rising tiers of Wizengamot members in purple robes, and felt his magic settle into that familiar, patient readiness. He was 11 years old and wearing his school robes because Andromeda had said "wear what you are," and he'd understood that to mean, be the thing you actually are, not a dressed-up performance of it. So he was in Gryffindor robes with the H-jumper underneath because it was January and the chamber was cold, and he stood in the center of the ancient room with his hands loose at his sides and waited. Cornelius Fudge was at the central bench, the minister's position, Harry identified. A man built for the appearance of confidence rather than its substance, dressed in lime green and wearing the expression of someone who had decided on an outcome and was now going through the formal process of appearing to arrive at it fairly. Harry read him in 30 seconds and moved on to the members around him, cataloging alliances and allegiances by proximity and expression with the practiced speed of 3 years of Andromeda's careful political education. "We are convened," Fudge said, "to hear the challenge filed on behalf of," a pause, waited, Sirius Orain Black, prisoner of Azkaban, regarding the legality of his committal under the emergency wartime powers of 1981. Andromeda stood and laid out the challenge with the precise, unhurried clarity of someone who had assembled her arguments from first principles and tested every joint in them. The wartime powers provision. The failure to review. The absence of trial. The specific legal text that Harry had found in Flourish and Blots, the subsection 4 pages past where the previous solicitor had stopped reading. She spoke for 20 minutes without notes and without hesitation, and the chamber listened with the grudging attention of people who are hearing something they were hoping not to. Then she sat down. Fudge looked around the chamber with the expression of a man expecting support. He found some, the older families, the ones whose names appeared in the same index pages as Malfoy, and found the edges of the room less certain. "The Ministry's position," Fudge said, "is that the emergency wartime powers granted sufficient authority for Mr. Black's committal, and that the absence of a formal trial does not, Minister," said Harry. The chamber went very still. Fudge blinked at him. "You are not, the floor has not been offered to." "I know," Harry said. "I'm offering it to myself." He looked up at the tiered benches. "My name is Harry Potter. I am the person Sirius Black was accused of betraying. I am the person he was supposed to have wanted dead." He kept his voice level and clear and let it carry in the stone room without effort. "Sirius Black was my parents' friend and my designated godfather. He has been in Azkaban for 9 years for a crime that was never proven in a courtroom." He paused. "I would like him to have a trial. Not because I've decided he's innocent, I don't have that evidence. But because the Wizarding World's justice system requires that the question be asked, and it hasn't been asked. He looked at Fudge directly. If Sirius Black is guilty, a trial will prove it. If the Ministry is unwilling to allow a trial, the question becomes why. Fudge's face had gone through several colors. You are 11 years old, he started. Yes, Harry said. I'm also the person your government has been protecting for a decade. I'd like to know if that protection extended to making sure no one asked awkward questions about the night it became necessary. He looked up at the tears again. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm asking for a trial. That's all. Silence. It lasted for 10 seconds, which in a room full of powerful wizards used to controlling the tempo of proceedings was a very long time. Then one of the senior members, an elderly witch 3, rose up with the specific posture of someone who has been waiting for an opening, said, a formal trial can be scheduled within 60 days. I propose the motion. Seconded, said another voice. Then a third. Fudge looked around the chamber with the expression of a man watching a riverbank give way. He could not, in the face of a public record and a seconded motion and Harry Potter standing in the center of the chamber in his school jumper, disappear this. He had, as Andromeda had told Harry was the objective, run out of room. The motion is carried, Fudge said, making it sound like a loss, which it was. Harry nodded once and sat back down. Beside him, Andromeda had her hands folded in her lap and was looking straight ahead with an expression that was composed and contained and underneath it blazing. Tonks was in the public gallery above. She'd been refused a floor pass on account of age, and Harry looked up and found her. Her hair was its named color, the invisible spectrum one she went when something was too large for the visible palette, and she looked at him with those dark eyes and he watched her take one long breath and let it out. He held the brass compass in his pocket and felt the needle point north. He was back at Hogwarts before the end of the first week of January, back into the rhythm of the castle and the careful watch on the third floor, and January went by in the particular quality that January has at Hogwarts, cold and long and academically dense, with the staff increasing expectations at the rate they always did in the period between holidays, as though the castle's weather were a schedule. The compass had been doing something new since early December. He'd noticed it in stages. First, it was more sensitive, picking up not just direction and distance but something qualitative, Tonks's emotional state, not precisely, not words, but the broad shape of it. He could tell the difference between her regular settled state and her focused practicing state and the less common but distinctive sharp alert he got when something had happened that she hadn't told him about yet. Second, it moved at rest now. Small shifts. She was getting her apparition license training early. Andromeda had arranged it, citing the bond as a relevant safety consideration, and the Ministry had approved it with the resigned pragmatism of bureaucrats dealing with a situation that had no good precedent. When she practiced, the compass got stronger. When she was within a mile of Hogwarts it was almost loud. Third, and most recently, there was something being sent through it that wasn't direction and wasn't emotion. It was specific. He figured it out in late January, sitting in the library after hours with his invisibility cloak over his shoulders and the bond doing the new thing, and he held very still and paid attention to it the way he paid attention to patterns, and what he understood was this: Tonks was sending him something deliberately. Pushing something through the anchor intentionally, the way she described her shifting when it was working at its best. Not a message in language. Something below language. Strength, he thought. That was the closest word. She was sending strength through the bond the way the bond had always run warm between them, but now directed, intentional. Like hands on shoulders rather than just warmth in a room. He wrote to her that night, You've been pushing something through the bond on purpose. Since about the 14th. I noticed it properly tonight. What are you doing? Her reply came the next morning, in the potions textbook. I told you to ask me about it at Christmas and then Christmas was complicated with the hearing. It's what I've been working on since October. The anchor runs both ways. Your magic anchors my shifting. My shifting, when I'm doing it intentionally, when I'm fully in control of it, amplifies your magic's structural integrity. That's the technical term Mum found in the records. Structural integrity. Meaning, not more raw power, but more resistant to external interference. Like broom jinxes. Or like whatever a piece of Voldemort attached to a nervous defense teacher might try to do to you if you ended up between him and what he wanted. I've been pushing it through the bond every morning since the 14th. I can sustain it for about 6 hours now. It fades and I rebuild it. It gets easier with practice. Are you feeling it? Does it do anything useful? Harry held the letter and felt the quality of himself, his magic, its edges, the way it moved. Compared it to how it had felt in October before the 14th of January, before whatever she'd started doing. He wrote back, yes. It feels like armor that's inside rather than outside. More stable. Less reactive. My magic used to jump slightly toward threats before I could direct it. Now it waits for me. How long did it take you to develop this? Tonks, about 3 months of serious practice. I found a reference in the 2nd edition Magical Theory book, the one you sent me from Flourish and Blots. The anchor pair strengthening thing. The book says it was theoretically possible but hadn't been documented because anchor pairs don't present to academic study. We're making new notes, apparently. Keep the compass close. I'm working on something else but I need another month. Harry, what else? Tonks, ask me in a month. February passed and March arrived and with it the first signs of Scottish spring, tentative, easily discouraged, but present in the angle of morning light and the way the lake stopped looking like the world's largest threat assessment. Harry was running his morning circuit on a Tuesday in early March when the compass lurched for the 2nd time. Not the sharp jerk of Andromeda's ministry visit. This was different. Slower and harder, like something pulling rather than startling, and it didn't settle when he stopped and breathed through it. It stayed. High and insistent and coming from the direction of the castle rather than north-northwest. He turned and looked at the castle. The 3rd floor. The pull was coming from the 3rd floor. Not the compass was north-northwest and steady. This was different, something his magic was tracking rather than the bond. The wrongness he'd been monitoring since September, the pressured dam water quality, it had changed. It was moving. He ran. Not up the main stairs, too slow, too public. He took the servants' route on the east side, the one behind the tapestry of the dancing wizards, up 3 floors in under 2 minutes, and emerged on the 3rd floor corridor with his wand drawn and his invisibility cloak, which he'd started carrying on his morning runs in February, in his inside pocket, not yet deployed. The corridor was empty. The door at the end was not closed. The large padlock that had been on it since September, Harry had checked it twice, carefully, without touching it, was open, hanging from the hasp. And from behind the door he could hear, very faintly, the sounds of something enormous asleep. Not unconscious. Sleeping. Music sleeping. He put on the cloak and went through the door. Fluffy was on the trapdoor. All 3 heads were down, resting on enormous paws, and from somewhere, a small harp in the corner, still playing, enchanted, an object that someone had placed and left, came a simple repeating lullaby. The dog's breath moved the floor. The trapdoor was open. Harry stood in the room with a sleeping 3-headed dog above the open trapdoor and felt his magic register what was below, the wrongness, full strength now, moving, urgent. He tapped the coin twice, the 3rd signal, the one that meant I'm here, are you, and felt the warmth come back immediately. He held it for 1 second. Then he went through the trapdoor. The devil's snare moved toward him and he was already murmuring, Lumos Solarum, before it reached him, a bright sustained light that sent it back in smooth haste. He dropped through the gap and landed running. The flying keys were a blur above him, he assessed them in 4 seconds, identified the oldest one by the bent wing, caught a broom from the wall hook, and was through in 45 seconds. He'd planned this. He'd planned every one of these rooms since Dumbledore described them in September. The chess set stopped him for 3 minutes, not because he couldn't see the solution but because he needed to play it through without error, because error here meant pieces the size of wardrobes taking physical exception to his presence. He moved without looking rattled, without looking rushed, the way he played everything, steadily, ahead of the obvious move. Through the next door. The potions logic puzzle was a row of bottles and a parchment riddle that Hermione would have loved and that Harry solved in 90 seconds because the logic was clean and well constructed, and he told himself he'd compliment Snape on it later if the situation allowed. He drank the smallest bottle. The cold moved through him like purpose. The final door opened. The mirror of Eriste stood in the center of a stone room lit by torches, and in front of it stood Quirinus Quirrell, and Quirinus Quirrell was talking to himself. Not to himself. To something in himself, with the strained quality of a man who has been a host for too long and is running out of the structural integrity that Tonks had no word for except exactly that word. Harry pulled off the invisibility cloak. Quirrell turned. His face was pale and sweating and the turban was visibly wrong and his eyes had the quality of a man who was not the only person looking through them. "You," Quirrell said. "Yes," Harry said. He stayed near the door. His wand was drawn. His magic was doing the settled armored thing that Tonks had been building for 6 weeks and it felt like bedrock. "You should not be here." The voice had slipped slightly, not Quirrell's tenor but something underneath, pressing upward. "I'm fairly often where I should not be," Harry said. He looked at the mirror. "You can't get the stone. You know that." Quirrell's head turned toward the mirror and back to Harry with the jerky motion of a man whose attention is being directed by something else. "I need only look." "You want it," Harry said. "Wanting it is why you can't have it. The mirror shows what you want. You want the stone to restore a body, to come back to power. The mirror sees that and gives you nothing." "The boy understands the enchantment," said a voice. Not Quirrell's. Something colder and older, pressed thin and faint through a borrowed throat, and yet even thin and faint it had a quality that Harry suspected normally made rooms go silent. He felt it move against his magic the way wind moves against a wall, present, forceful, finding no purchase. "I understand it," Harry said. He wasn't looking at Quirrell. He was looking at the mirror. "Do you want me to look?" Quirrell's expression shifted. The something inside him shifted. And Harry felt it, the consideration, the calculation, the intelligence that was not Quirrell's grinding through the proposition and finding it superficially reasonable and fundamentally dangerous in a way it was currently not in a position to address. "You want the stone to be found safely," the cold voice said. "You would give it to Dumbledore." "Yes," Harry said. "Then look." Harry walked to the mirror. His reflection walked toward him in the glass, and the Harry in the mirror looked back at him with green eyes, and in the mirror's version of his hand the Philosopher's Stone was a small red jewel, held not possessively but matter-of-factly, and then Harry felt it, the weight in his actual pocket, solid and real. He didn't look at his pocket. He held Quirrell's gaze in the mirror. "I have it," Harry said. "Give it to me." "No." The word was simple and flat and left no room for interpretation. In the stone room with the torches and the ancient mirror, Harry stood with the stone in his pocket and felt Voldemort's presence shove against his magic like a tide against a harbor wall. The bond burned warm and deep and steady beneath it, Tonks's 6 weeks of deliberate pushing holding the line with the quiet strength of something built rather than summoned, and the tide found nothing to move. Quirrell moved. Not toward Harry, sideways, suddenly, trying to flank the door, and Harry moved with him because blocking the exit was the tactical priority and he'd learned chess from Ron and chess from the room downstairs and the principle was the same, control the lines. "Stupefy," Harry said. Quirrell blocked it, a physical shield rather than a counter, his arms crossing, the force catching him and staggering him but not dropping him. The thing inside him was too strong for a stun to penetrate through the host. "You are a child," the cold voice said, with the particular inflection of someone reminding themselves as much as stating it. "Yes," Harry said. Try again. Quirrell came at him directly, reaching for his wrist, for his wand hand, disarm, the first principle, and Harry let the hand come and then turned it, the same movement Andromeda had shown him in November in the back garden as something called basics, a physical discipline that had nothing to do with wands. Quirrell's grip was strong but his balance was wrong, he was two bodies in one and they had conflicting instincts, and Harry turned the grip and put Quirrell's hand against his own cheek. What happened next was not something Harry planned. The contact, his skin, her magic's armor, the bond running through him, and Voldemort on the other side of Quirrell's palm, produced a reaction that was not a spell and not a jinx and not anything in any book Harry had read. It was the sound of something that had been dead for 10 years touching something that had been alive with sacrificial magic for exactly as long, and Lily Potter's love and Tonks's deliberate strength and Harry's own magic recognizing the thing that had tried to unmake him at 15 months. Quirrell screamed. His hand where it had touched Harry's face went white. Not pale, white, paper white, the color of something from which life is departing. He pulled back and looked at his hand with Quirrell's eyes and whatever was in the eyes below that was, for one fraction of a second, afraid. Harry felt it, the fear, striking his magic and bouncing off the armor cleanly. He felt the bond pull once, sharp, Tonks on the other end feeling the exchange through the anchor, and he felt her push back with everything she'd been building for 6 weeks, a wave of warm intent flooding through the bond and into him and amplifying what was already there. He pointed his wand at Quirrell and pushed his magic through it, not a spell, not a schoolroom charm, just his magic undirected and unqualified, everything it was, Lily's sacrifice and his father's recklessness and the click in a park on Magnolia Crescent and 3 years of letters and a compass and a legal text and an 11-year-old boy who had decided one August morning that he was done being managed. The light was bright. Quirrell fell. Harry stood in the stone room with the torches and breathed. Quirrell lay on the floor with his hands pressed over his face, crumpled at the knees, and the something in him was no longer pressing through, it was elsewhere, displaced, the particular quality of presence that Harry had been tracking since September simply absent. Gone out of the room like smoke out of a window. Harry held still and felt the room with his magic and found nothing dark except the residue, the stain of presence that wouldn't fully leave for some time. He breathed through it, steady. Then he felt it, through the bond, from north-northwest, a single sustained pulse of warmth that was not the directional signal or the 3-tap signal or any signal they'd named. It was just Tonks, her full attention, her full presence through the connection, held there for 5 seconds. "I've got you." He pressed his hand to his sternum and felt it. "I know." Then he sat down on the floor of the stone room with his back against the mirror and his legs out in front of him and the Philosopher's Stone in his pocket and waited for Dumbledore. Dumbledore came in less than 5 minutes. He looked at Quirrell on the floor and then at Harry against the mirror and his face did something that was relief and grief and guilt in a proportion that Harry would not have been able to name but could read. "Are you hurt?" Dumbledore asked. "No," Harry said. "Quirrell?" "Alive," Dumbledore said, crouching briefly over the still form. "Barely. The separation will have." He paused. "It will have cost him a great deal." "He chose to host Voldemort," Harry said. "Yes. He did." Dumbledore stood. He looked at Harry with those tired, warm, complicated eyes. "The stone." Harry pulled it from his pocket and held it out. Dumbledore took it and held it and looked at it with an expression that was careful and sad and resolved all at once. "I'm going to have a conversation with Nicholas," he said, and there was something in his tone that was too large for Harry to fully parse but that had the quality of a man who has been putting something off and has now run out of reasons. "You're going to destroy it," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "The elixir Nicholas and Perenelle have stored will suffice for a time," Dumbledore said quietly. "They have had very long lives. They are not afraid of what comes after." He looked at Harry. "You knew this was what I intended." "I worked it out," Harry said. "The whole plan was to draw Voldemort here, let him try for the stone, remove the stone from the equation when he'd failed. He has no body now. He has no immediate means of return. He paused. It sets him back significantly. It does, Dumbledore said. Though not permanently. He will find other means, other vessels. It is a delay, not an end. I know, Harry said. But delays have value. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. Your hand touched his. Yes. And your mother's magic, and whatever else you were carrying, yes, Harry said again. Dumbledore sat down, which was unusual and therefore significant, on the floor of the stone room in his magnificent robes, next to Harry. He was quiet for a moment. I owe you a number of explanations, he said. You owe me one very large one, Harry said, that contains all the smaller ones. Dumbledore looked at him sideways. James used to say something very similar about complex situations. He called it the single conversation principle. Deal with all of it at once rather than parcelling it out. It's efficient, Harry said. It is. Dumbledore paused. The night your parents died. What I knew. What I didn't know. The choices I made about where you went and why. He stopped. There are things in this story that I have told myself were necessary and that I believe were necessary and that I also believe were wrong, and those three truths coexist uncomfortably. I know, Harry said. You can tell me the whole thing. I won't be dramatic about it. You're never dramatic, Dumbledore said, with something that was almost amusement. Not if I can avoid it, Harry agreed. So Dumbledore told him, there on the floor of the stone room with Quirrell unconscious nearby and the stone gone and the torches burning low. He told him about the prophecy, the one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, and the shape of it, the weight of it, the decision to make Harry a weapon pointed at a future war without telling Harry he was a weapon. He told him about Godric's Hollow and what he'd known and what he hadn't and the night he'd placed an 11-month-old on a doorstep in Little Whinging with a letter and the blood wards and the decision that had cost Harry 10 years in a cupboard that Dumbledore had not, until Andromeda appeared in his office in September and laid it out, properly allowed himself to see. Harry listened. He asked 5 questions, all of them specific, and Dumbledore answered them without evasion, which cost the old man something visible and which Harry respected without making it easier. When it was over he sat with the information for a moment. The prophecy, he said. It says either must die at the hand of the other. It could mean him killing me or me killing him. Yes. Does it matter which the prophecy means? Dumbledore considered. Prophecies are not instructions, he said, carefully. They are possible futures, crystallized by sufficient intention. The act of believing a prophecy helps make it real. So if I didn't believe it, you cannot unknow it now, Dumbledore said. But you can decide how much of your life you give to it. He paused. That is a decision I should have let you make years ago. Harry looked at the floor. Thought about the prophecy and the weight of it. Then thought about the park in Magnolia Crescent and the click and the compass and the legal text and the morning he'd walked out of number 4 and not looked back. He thought about Sirius Black waiting for a trial in 60 days and Ron's chess sense and Hermione's library and the Tonks family kitchen and Ted's loud laugh and Andromeda's Welsh. A weapon pointed at a future war. He turned that over. I'm not a weapon, he said. No, Dumbledore agreed, quietly and completely. No, you are not. I'll do what needs to be done, Harry said. I'd have done it anyway, without the prophecy, because it's right and because he killed my parents and because there are people I'm not going to let him touch. He looked at Dumbledore. But I'm doing it as myself. Not as a piece in your plan. I know, Dumbledore said. I think I've known that for some time. He paused. Possibly since a conversation in Diagon Alley in which you told me that you were not going to be managed. And you've been adjusting. I've been adjusting, Dumbledore confirmed. He looked at the stone, absent from his hand now, pocketed. Not always fast enough. But adjusting. Harry looked at him. This was, He understood, as much of an apology as Albus Dumbledore could produce in this form, the admission laid alongside the evidence, no performance, just the thing itself. He could work with that. Start of next year, Harry said. Full information. Anything you know that affects me, I know too. In advance. Not after I've already gone through the trapdoor. Agreed, Dumbledore said. And Sirius Black's trial proceeds without ministry interference. I will use whatever influence I have, Dumbledore said. Which is considerable, Harry said. Which is considerable, Dumbledore agreed. Harry stood. He brushed the stone dust off his school robes and the Tonks jumper underneath and looked around the room, the mirror, Quirrell, the torches. The room where the story had moved, as he'd known it would, before the end of the year. You should probably get a healer for Quirrell, Harry said. Yes, Dumbledore said, standing with the slight effort of age. I should. He looked at Harry. You're all right. You've asked me that twice tonight, Harry said. I have. Dumbledore looked at him with those eyes that had too many things in them to name easily. It bears repeating. I'm all right, Harry said, the way he always said it, not as reassurance, as a fact about his interior landscape. More all right than I was. He put on the invisibility cloak and walked out of the stone room and up through the protections. He didn't need the cloak for those, just for the corridors, just for the castle in the pre-dawn dark, and emerged on the third floor into the ordinary dark of early morning, the stone and the cold and the castle breathing around him. He tapped the coin 3 times. 3 taps back. Immediately. Then a sustained warmth that was not a signal and not a direction and not one of their named codes but something that existed below all of those in the place where the bond lived, and what it said in the language that didn't have words was, I was here the whole time. Harry walked back through the dark castle, which was alive and old and paying attention, and his magic moved with him, easy and certain, the compass settled and true, pointing at a pink-haired girl north-northwest who had crashed into his afternoon 4 years ago and changed the shape of everything, and he was 11 years old and he had just walked through a stone room where Voldemort had tried to kill him and he was fine, actually fine, and ahead of him was Summer and Sirius Black's trial. And the Tonks house kitchen and Ted's laugh and years of Hogwarts still to come and an anchor that ran both ways and held. He reached the portrait hole and said the password and went through. Ron was awake, sitting up in bed with his chest set, which was how Ron processed anxiety. He played through it, endgame to endgame, until the thing that was worrying him resolved into something he could put a name to. You're back, Ron said. I'm back, Harry said. Did you? Yes. Ron looked at him with those straightforward eyes and did the thing he was quietly extraordinary at, took the full measure of what was in front of him without flinching or dramatizing, and said, simply, brilliant. Are you hungry? Harry had not, in the chaos of the stone room and Dumbledore's floor confession, thought about whether he was hungry. He now discovered that he was. Significantly. Very, he said. Ron produced from under his bed a paper bag of the leftover honeydukes from Christmas with the confidence of a man who had prepared for exactly this contingency, and they sat on their respective beds in the dark Gryffindor dormitory and ate chocolate and said nothing of great consequence, and it was, Harry thought, about as close to perfect as a 3 a.m. post-Voldemort confrontation situation was ever likely to get. Hedwig arrived at the dormitory window at approximately 4 a.m, tapping imperiously at the glass, and when Harry opened it she flew in and settled on his bedpost and regarded him with amber eyes that managed to communicate both relief and the specific I told you so quality of an animal who has had opinions about dangerous activities all year and been ignored. I'm fine, Harry told her. Hedwig made a sound. I know, Harry said. You can report back. She looked at him for 3 more seconds, as though conducting a final inventory, and then turned on the bedpost and composed herself with the magnificent dignity of an owl who has assessed the situation and found it, grudgingly, acceptable. By 6 o'clock Harry was asleep. By 7, Tonks's letter was in the pages of his potions textbook. He didn't find it until he woke up at 8:30, later than his usual time, and sat up and found the dormitory bright with March morning and reached automatically for the textbook. The letter was short. Harry, I felt everything. The whole thing, from the moment you went through the trapdoor. Not specifically, not pictures, but the shape of it. I kept pushing. I don't know if you felt it clearly or if it just felt like you. It felt like me, she'd scratched out and rewritten, it should feel like you. That's the point of the armor. It's not me in there. It's just you, but better anchored. I'm glad you're all right. I knew you would be. I was scared anyway, which I want you to understand is entirely reasonable even if it wasn't logically necessary. Tell me everything when you come home. T.P.S. Hedwig came and sat on my windowsill for 3 hours last night and refused to leave until I'd read every one of your letters from this term. I think she wanted me to have the context. I think she's decided she likes me after all. P.P.S. Sirius's trial is confirmed for April 14th. Harry read the letter in the bright March morning with the warmth from north-northwest steady and sure against his sternum, and Ron was still asleep, and outside the dormitory window the Hogwarts grounds were coming into the pale thin sunlight of early spring, and the castle breathed around him, and the compass pointed home. He wrote back on the inside cover of the potions textbook, not his best parchment, just the nearest surface, because the thing he wanted to say was not a formal letter and didn't need to be, I felt you the whole time. Every second from the trapdoor to the mirror room. It was there when I needed it most and I knew where it came from and it made the difference. Tell me what you're working on next. HPS. I knew she'd come round. He tucked the textbook under his arm and got up and went down to the common room and found Hermione already at the back table with 3 books open, because Hermione's response to anything was information, and she looked up at him when he came in and said nothing but put down her quill, which was her version of dropping everything. Are you all right? She asked. Yes, Harry said. She looked at him, the full intelligent assessment, reading the quality of yes against everything she knew about the person saying it. Then she picked her quill back up. I'm going to need to know everything, she said, when you're ready to tell it. I know, Harry said. Not now if you're not ready. I'm ready, Harry said, and sat down across from her, and the morning was full of light, and outside the castle the long winter was giving way. The trial of Sirius Orain Black, conducted before a full session of the Wisengamot on the 14th of April, lasted 4 hours. Harry sat in the gallery this time, beside Tonks, both of them in the public section above the chamber floor. Andromeda was below with the solicitor. Ted was on Harry's other side with his hands on his knees and his eyes very bright. The evidence was thin, it had always been thin, which was why there had been no trial. The prosecution relied on witness testimony from Aurors who had arrived after the fact, on Pettigrew's finger, on the crater in the street. The solicitor demolished all 3 with the particular pleasure of someone who has been looking forward to this exact moment for months. Peter Pettigrew was the essential problem, and Harry knew this, had known it since Tonks's first letter about Sirius. A dead man's finger in a crater was not a dead man, and a Metamorphmagus registered nowhere could, theoretically, be alive and free and living as a Muggle rat. The solicitor made this point with the legal precision of someone who had been briefed on a Animagus theory by an 11-year-old in a flourish and blot's back corner. The prosecution could not produce a body. The prosecution could not explain why a man who had just committed murder and whose master had just been destroyed would stand in a street and laugh. The prosecution could not explain why the 16 Muggles had been killed by a blasting curse from Pettigrew's direction, not Black's. The prosecution had, fundamentally, never asked these questions before, and the asking of them now in a room full of people who had spent 9 months reading the public record challenge made the answers very difficult to wave away. Sirius Black was acquitted at 2:30 on the afternoon of April 14th. He was not in the chamber. He was in St. Mungo's, where he had been transferred 6 weeks before from Azkaban at the start of the hearing process, because the legal team had successfully argued that the state of a prisoner awaiting trial review was relevant to the proceedings and that 9 years in Azkaban without conviction had consequences that the Wisengamot should be aware of. The healers had said he was physically recovering. The psychological picture was more complicated and would take more time. Harry listened to the verdict read aloud by the senior Wisengamot member and felt something in his chest release, not a tension he'd known was there, but pressure that had been constant long enough to seem structural. Like a room he'd been standing in with a low ceiling and only now, walking out, realizing how much of his energy had gone into not straightening up. Beside him, Tonks made a sound. Small and brief and private, quickly suppressed. He didn't look at her. He reached sideways and found her hand with his and held it, not pressing, just present, and she held back once and then let go because there were people around them and she had opinions about public displays of emotion that she thought were undignified even when they weren't romantic in the slightest and just two people who had carried something heavy together putting it down. Ted Tonks said something under his breath in Muggle Welsh, which Harry had never heard Ted do before. It sounded like a prayer. Below them, on the chamber floor, Andromeda's back was very straight and very still. They went to St. Mungo's that evening. Andromeda had arranged it with the healers, a brief visit, 15 minutes, don't expect too much of him. Harry had thought about what to say for 3 weeks and discarded everything he'd prepared because prepared things were the wrong tool for this. Sirius Black was sitting up in the hospital bed when they were let in. He was thin in the way that spoke of years rather than days and his hair was long and his eyes had the quality of a man who has spent significant time in the presence of dementors and is working, steadily, at the long process of getting back. But the eyes themselves were sharp. Still sharp. They looked at Harry and Harry looked at them, and for a moment the room held the specific weight of two people meeting for the first time who have known each other's names for a very long time. "You look like James," Sirius said. His voice was rougher than Harry had imagined it. "Everyone says that," Harry said. "You've got Lily's eyes," Sirius said. "And her," he stopped. Something moved through his expression that was grief and love and something that was not quite either. Her way of looking at people. "Like you're reading them." "I got a letter from you," Harry said. "Back in February. I didn't know if it arrived." "It arrived." Sirius looked at him. "I read it 7 times. The Dementors take most things but they couldn't take that." He paused. "You said you were working on getting me out." "Yes." "You're 11. "I know," Harry said. "I had good books and a very useful solicitor." Sirius's expression moved through something that was too complicated to name and arrived somewhere that looked, unexpectedly, like a smile. "James would have loved you," he said, and it was the simplest sentence in the room and the heaviest. Harry held it. "I know," he said, and meant it in the way he'd meant everything since the park, not as performance, not as convention, but as the genuine interior fact. He knew. And the knowing, even about a person he'd never met who was gone, was not grief exactly, it was something else, something that was related to the warmth he felt when the compass pointed home, related to Ted's laugh and Andromeda's Welsh and the letter from Tonks that said I felt everything, something that was the opposite of alone. He stayed the full 15 minutes and said things of no great consequence and listened to Sirius's voice find its register again in the simple mechanics of conversation, and when the healer came to end the visit Harry stood and said, "We'll be back next week." "You don't have to," Sirius started. "I know," Harry said. "I'll be back next week." Sirius looked at him for a moment. Then he settled back against the pillows with the expression of a man who has been in a very dark room for a long time and has only just begun to believe in windows. "Next week, then," he said. In the corridor outside, Tonks fell into step beside Harry and they walked the hospital corridor in silence for a while, and the coin was warm in Harry's pocket and the compass was steady and outside the St. Mungo's windows London was going on in the full busy particular way of a city in spring, and Harry thought about the year behind him. The trapdoor and the mirror and the chamber and the trial, and the year ahead, and all the years after that, and he felt the shape of his own life like a horizon, wide and open and entirely his. "He's going to be all right," Tonks said. "Not a question." "Yes," Harry said. "It'll take time." "But yes." She walked beside him, shoulder to shoulder in the hospital corridor, and her hair was the unnamed color it went when things were too large for the named ones, and Harry let it be large, let the whole thing be large, the compass and the anchor and everything they'd built across 4 years in letters and parks and courtrooms and stone rooms and hospital corridors, because some things earned their size and didn't need to be made smaller to be manageable. He was 12 years old in July. There were years ahead of him, and whatever was in them, he'd meet it straight on, the way he met everything, leading with his chest and his compass pointing true and his magic settled in his bones like something that had always known where it lived. The hospital corridor opened into the lobby and beyond it the London afternoon, and they walked out into it together.